Okay.
What's going on, everyone? It's David Palmer, Leo King, and Dr. Ann Wohlcke here for History in the Stars. And of course, today we're going to be talking about Camelot and the revolutionary election here of 2024. How are you doing, Ann? What's going on?
I'm doing well. How about you, Mr. I called the election?
I mean, there was two routes I saw, and I said my main one was no matter what, there's zero possibility of Kamala Harris winning, period.
Right.
Two is about getting J.D. Vance in there, however that happens, based off the astrology of mundane astrology. So now we've gone through part one of my prediction that J.D. Vance would get in through Trump. Now, from now to Inauguration Day, I think will be really interesting. But I do, I put like more of a real honest prediction of around the springtime during those eclipses as being the switch off. But my second part is that it gets a little, that Kamala Harris will be the first woman president by just being given it pretty close coming up here, probably here in sometime after Saturn direct. And then the situations will get so extreme that the whole world and even Americans are going to be begging for Trump to get in there, and he won't be able to get in there, and that causes chaos. So I did a whole video on that, but that's not why we're here today.
No, we're not. But I thought that it was something that people will want to hear about. Is just people were aware of what you said, and I think we want to celebrate the fact that you were correct. And I know that it took a lot for you to be able to, these elections that aren't popular with everybody, especially in the astrology community or within media, that for you to stick to your astrological, know-how and to go with what you knew was the right way to look at astrology. You definitely have a lot of courage for doing that, and I feel like we need to just let you know we appreciate you always providing the best astrological take, and that you base it on an actual system and studying that you have done, which everybody who made their astrological predictions based it on whatever their system was, right?
Yeah.
But many people, I feel, did temper it with more what they wanted to happen and not really looking at the astrology for what it said. Or I saw a lot of people saying, well, Jupiter's in Kamala's 12th house or whatever they're talking about, right? And that actually that'll be good for her. A lot of kind of excusing or explaining about why they're going to do their certain interpretations.
Astrosplaining, I guess.
Astrosplaining.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think it was proven. I said this last night with Robert Phoenix that the whole sign community, we're all on the Kamala side with Hellenistic astrology and using zodiacal releasing and whole sign. They lost. And I think that's been a huge fad for a moment here, using whole sign. It's been around, of course, forever, but to know that Jupiter's in the 12th house of a Gemini rising, when Jupiter's in Gemini, you need to be using any other house system than whole sign. And that's where we can define the ascendant correctly. Mm-hmm. And actually get to more, I mean, we're in 2024, so we should be using more precise points, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. And so, for Jupiter to be retrograde in her 12th, she was born with Jupiter retrograde in her 12th. I mean, I brought it up, but right there alone should have told any basic astrologer, yeah, she ain't going to be in there. I mean, she didn't even show up for her own supporters.
Right.
It was about her own speech, about some sort of legacy speech today in her concession, which I find kind of sad. I really do, because I feel if you really do look at Trump, even if he lost the 2020, even though there's a lot of, finally people are starting to ask those questions again, like, what? Like, if you look at the voting, the amount of votes that Kamala got are exactly to every Democratic president over this last, 6 elections. The only one different is Joe Biden, and it's over 20 million more. It makes no sense. So, but anyway, I think it's been a cool moment for the very slim few astrologers out there. And what's funny is, to me, it's like I'm saying Trump because it's about Vance.
Right.
So I'm the only one actually being like, this is not about Trump. It's about Vance, but there is a completion story here for Trump. Last night, when it was live, I was with Robert Phoenix. I even said, well, looking at this, maybe they're in a dark-filled room and MSNBC is going to call it first. But it ended up being Fox, which I thought was interesting because they were the one who called it in 2020 for Biden, right? For Arizona, and really caused stir. Then I'm like, oh, if it's Fox right now, in the next couple minutes, it'll be Wisconsin. He goes, why Wisconsin? I go, because Wisconsin's the one where they okay, let's stop counting, right? Because after Pennsylvania and the weird stuff, it was like Wisconsin was like the one place where they're like, we might get the answer. No, it doesn't look like we're not. And then it just really, the whole thing turned. And I'm like, that means they're going to call Wisconsin and say that he won. That's exactly what happened. And so I'm like, oh, okay, there's like a retribution spiritually happening for 2020 that was secretly, mystically happening. But I think that's what's kind of interesting about where we're at today. It does feel like that Pluto Capricorn revolutionary moment that we went through as not a nation 248 years ago, but in many ways the idea of it. And I think that idea of that same spark of what we think of America today and what it has started as at the original inception of it is coming back full circle. There's a lot of full circle I think we'll be covering today.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of full circle. And I think for the first time, I really see probably what the people who lived during the revolution saw or what they experienced. Because if you look at one side of the whole event, you see people who are so upset that Harris lost and so confused about how she could have had such a big loss, and just really in their frame of mind, they're in their box of what they believe. And then you have people on the other side who see it completely differently. So it's interesting to be in the world where you can turn it to, we were watching things earlier here. So go from one video on YouTube to another, and people are having exactly opposite reactions. But what's funny is that a lot of the people who are having a really horrible reaction about the loss of Harris are as upset. The things they're upset about are the same things people were upset that they thought they would lose if Trump lost.
Right.
Right. So there's a similarity of issues coming up no matter what. Right. So this issue of democracy and what does it mean and who is represented. You have everybody caring about that. Right. It was one of the top things that they said in polls before the election. People cared the most about democracy, the future of democracy on both sides.
Yep. Yeah,
Or-
the exit, that was what the exit polling was. The number one concern was the threat to democracy. The irony was it was Kamala Harris was the threat.
And
Right?
but
And we all, and
Yeah.
anybody who understood that knew that, but the media and anybody who were a Harris supporter were blinded by that because you bring up censorship and all the things history has shown us, right? Censorship, all these, my body, my choice. What about everybody's body and their choice, including chemicals in the water, including all these kind of things. Her campaign didn't cover any of them. Free speech situations that are happening right now, censorship online. I mean, it's scary in the United Kingdom, what's been going on with what you say and being arrested. And we just saw how left it went over there. That I thought it was the most funniest thing, that the thing that was being thrown in the face by the media was actually what Americans voted at the box and said, no, you know what, you're right. It is the greatest threat. The Amish came out and voted.
this is the best part. The Amish came out, and you looked up the numbers right before we went live.
Yeah.
180,000
Yeah.
in Pennsylvania. So who would have thought this group established in the Protestant Reformation that we've been looking
Right.
at? And I just looked it up. You can trace them back to the Anabaptists that go all the way back to 1525. So this group.
Right, that's right after Saturn, Neptune, and Pisces, 1523.
Right. So, I mean, and that group is all about having migrated from one area to another where they could farm in peace and be pacifists and not have to, support the state to be able to practice their religious beliefs. So they finally got so angry in this election that they came out in droves in their buggies to vote.
Yeah.
So
I know that was, we were looking at some of the pictures. I think the media still hasn't talked about that, but Amish don't come out and vote. 3,000 of them voted in 2020. There's many cycles where they don't vote at all because they're not part of society. They don't want to be part of it. Mm-hmm. But the FDA tried to take away their religious freedom of being able to have their own non-pasteurized milk from their own cows, stuff like that. And that's against their religious freedom, and it's going into their own health. I'll be honest. I'd probably rather have dinner at an Amish farm and community than anywhere else in America. They're making it themselves. Mm-hmm. There's no chemicals. And the FDA is trying to come in there and saying that's bad.
yeah.
That's scary. And that's all Democrats pushing it. They're also killing people's squirrels too. But I mean, to me, that was like 180,000. Well, guess what? Trump won by like 140 or 150,000 in Pennsylvania. So those Amish had a big impact. Mm-hmm. And so I just think it's interesting that I think, maybe history, you are the historian. Maybe it will take a long time and people to look back and realize how big this was of a big statement. Because we went through Trump the first time, then we went through this really weird transitional period of the pendulum swinging extreme the other way, but also with a really weird election. And then people just saying, no, we want that other direction. We do not want to go this way. Because it really was an option of the same choices, just which one. But it went really hardcore this way. So I hope that helps kind of. I think Pluto and Capricorn does do its stamp, kind of like, this is the way it is. And I think a lot of people that I've talked to in the last 24 hours have been like, this is the way the country was supposed to be at its inception. Like, not this huge federalist, over-controlled government, over-extended government in every position, but allowing us to be free and do what we want to be and express ourselves how we want to express ourselves and not be so worried about it. And so I find people kind of like, we were at a tipping point where maybe we were going to lose democracy by letting it be given away for safety, has been warned by Benjamin Franklin and some of these founding fathers that were, don't you trade your liberty for safety ever. Mm-hmm. And I feel that there was a clinging to the system of like, this is it's democracy supposed to look like, when actually what it's supposed to look like is pretty rebellious, and really raw, and not a lot of rules. So, and it was interesting too, because even the ballot measures for marijuana didn't pass in all those states. Psychedelics didn't pass. So my big prediction for like those things, people didn't believe me. Right. But I've said for like, I remember when Craig was with us all the time, and he's like, what do you mean? Marijuana is just going to keep going. I'm like, no. Saturn, Neptune, once it gets closer, it's going to be this whole, no more drugs. No more. And that's what happened. All these states had all these opportunities to have psychedelics, marijuana, and they just said no. The abortion thing wasn't even that big of a deal either. They actually were like, no, let's cap it at these weeks. And it wasn't that big a deal. So it was like it was this huge, overly propagated thing. And I think that's what kind of leads to this revolutionary moment of that end of Pluto Capricorn, where what really matters is freedom. And now it has that weird kind of turning, which does bring up Camelot, because there is a Kennedy in there now. Right. And there's a lot to it more, but I think it's a good way to like look at what does this new frontier look like. But it's weird because there is this kind of trying to bring it back in the modern age. And we also saw during the Jupiter-Saturn of 1960, which brought Kennedy in, and then also the one that we just had in 2020, bring another Kennedy in. And the whole Kennedy administration is known for being Camelot. Yet, ironically, it's kind of the horrible, dark Mordred story of Camelot. But what's interesting is, Kennedy did get assassinated, JFK and John F. Kennedy. And so it's interesting now that Trump got shot. He survived. RFK has joined forces, and now there's this kind of extreme opportunity for a Camelot style. It's really interesting. Energy. Yeah, that Trump in his speech last night as well, like brought up all the people who have been working with him. And he has brought together people from all different backgrounds in a coalition that is really unlike any that's succeeded, I think, in American history. I'm not an American historian, so American historians can correct me and let me know. But I really feel like it's such an interesting, eclectic group of people. So we have RFK Jr., Elon Musk, Tulsi Gabbard, Amish,
the Amish people. The other thing that's interesting is that the people who came out in and voted, right? A lot of people are very upset that the Latino vote was so much for Trump. Or I heard people today blaming Gen X guys, like what's their problem?
Yeah, Gen X actually was the highest in the ages for Trump, which was the Pluto Virgos. Well, that's interesting because they actually that's their role. Yeah. For Pluto at end of Capricorn into Aquarius, is they're the one who help get it in there, and they're the people that make that happen. Mm-hmm. So if I think about 1776 and 1775 and this idea of, okay, we got all 13 colonies, they got to come together. We got to come together with this Declaration of Independence. We need to make sure that they all agree. And there's, of course, a bunch of debating about that. I bet you it was the townspeople that were mainly Pluto Virgos that all were like, we support you, put the vote in for us, make it happen, and the levy's this, muskets off, Right, it's all those. And it was Pluto Virgos that did it. So all the people doing the Pluto Virgo tasks behind the scenes, does that mean that they would have been doing everyday things that were transformative, or? Yeah, the ground game of the Trump campaign was like way crazier and way more extensive and volunteer than Kamala's campaign. Mm-hmm. Plus, I was kind of laughing because I thought, if you're a candidate, there's nothing like Trump, because people have Trump. I have Trump flags. There's Trump flags. People fly them. Even when he wasn't president, right? Now he's also historically, right, the second president to come in after losing an election. Well, he's even more crazier, in my opinion, than Cleveland, because it was like 1, 2, 3, and I won 1 and I won 3. Like, it's like back, boom, boom, boom. It's like this really intense, like, you just get Trump the whole 3 election cycles straight, and this huge comeback that's just momentous. Like, the whole country is just like, we want it. Mm-hmm. Grover Cleveland did come back for a second term, but it's not the same kind of pizzazz. Yeah.
So we wanted to talk about Grover Cleveland a bit, but I have another question for you. Back on the Pluto Virgos. So Elon Musk is a Pluto Virgo, right? And so I wanted to think more about the role of the Pluto Virgo. So in a way, he did what you said when he bought Twitter and tried to create this forum for other people, for other people's use, right? That's been his role in so many ways,
right? Is
to create the objects, create the cars, or create the rockets, that whatever is going to be needed to facilitate the use of democracy, to the use of your freedom. How are you going to spend your time? How are you going to do it living more sustainably? Are you going to use this public forum like Twitter/X to express your opinions in a way that empowers the individual? But he is not standing there. And this is something that I think is key to what I keep hearing from RFK Jr. as well, who's not a Pluto Virgo, but this idea that the people involved are empowering other people to be able to use their freedom wisely, or to be able to live in a fulfilling way that they would like to live, to allow the Amish to farm the way that they want. And we were just watching RFK Jr. speaking, I think, on MSNBC, right? An interview.
It's actually NBC News.
Oh, it was NBC News, where the interviewer asked him, "What are you going to do about fluoride when Trump comes into office?" And he was explaining, right? Here is the history of fluoride, and here is why it's bad, and here's what's, or I guess
the October 4th federal case just said there's never been any human safety tests on fluoride in the water on humans. And so I can't believe that the media is freaking out. People are freaking out over this. Like, you want to continue just pouring fluoride when you take a shower, when you wash your hands, when you do that, right? Like, when actually there's never been a safety study on it. And he's not going to force it. He's going to make recommendation and also get the science out to people that was from the court, because he's taken down Monsanto. That's what he's.
Which I thought we were all about.
People just, I don't know what happened, but people like kind of got lost in forgetting, like, don't you want the guy who fought Monsanto and GMOs and all these poisons with like weed killers and all these things, now showing us they're doing the same stuff in our food supply, our water supply, and of course other areas, pharmaceuticals, and the corruption in it. To kind of jump back to the Elon Musk thing, I feel like in the revolution, what made the revolution happen was the printing press and getting the pamphlets out. And Elon Musk buying Twitter. Twitter is the #1 news app for the last year. You go on Apple Store, go on your store, and you look up news, it'll be the #1 app. So most people, both sides, got their news on Twitter, now X. And so if you think about the revolution, the way that it was able to get to a Declaration of Independence was all that news. The way that we even got to a constitutional convention was pamphlets, right? We covered that on our last show. So he is that person providing the presses, and then himself also being a unique one that also is one of the authors, because his posts and the posts that he shares, right, get so much. So it's kind of he's a really unique individual coming up with like, yeah, he does SpaceX and Starlink and Tesla and robots now and AI and all that. And that's crazy. But to me, it's Twitter. He really even says he got it. And the reason why he's doing all this was personal about the law they passed here in California, AB 1955, about that in public schools now that teachers aren't allowed to inform parents if their child comes out as having questions of their gender identity. And so if you really think about it, it's like a huge thing happened, whether that was a tea issue with taxes or stamp acts, however you want to look at it from that history, that moves people to do things. The Democrats weren't moved to do anything. There wasn't any, even with the abortion, there wasn't anything except a Planned Parenthood bus and have an abortion at the DNC. But that's it. There wasn't like a, why didn't you go do that to the areas like that aren't doing it? Are you too afraid? It shows that there wasn't a rebellion. Like if they cared about it so much, Planned Parenthood would have swamped Texas with Planned Parenthood buses and just said, okay, we'll drive you to the next state and you can do it in the bus or something. I don't know. I'm just thinking way outside the box to help people see that there wasn't a Pluto Capricorn movement of any sort on the left.
Yeah.
You know?
And, I wanted to finish my thought really fast on RFK Jr. with the fluoride interview. What I thought was interesting was that the guy was asking him to say, yes, I am going to implement this as soon as Trump is in office. And what I thought was interesting was the way he said, he refused to say that really. He said, yeah, we're going to look into it. But he never made it about him, right?
Right.
It wasn't about, I am going to do this like a dictator.
Or Trump either. He didn't say they're gonna.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what we're seeing on the side where the dictator is supposed to be. I feel like there was obviously some transformation too when he almost got killed, right? We have to think about that, the role of all of that. But he has really done everything he can to bring in all of these experts from different areas of our world where people are really having issues. From
the other side of the aisle completely, at the other party.
And there's these people who aren't going to step in and assert themselves. And it's not just about their political career. And the best example of that, I think, is RFK Jr. because he stepped back from his own efforts to become president. As a Kennedy, I feel like that is such a great example of leadership. And I think that's that Camelot idea, right, was for King Arthur to lead. Part of it was what was happening behind the scenes with Merlin, right? But also
the Round Table,
bringing the Round Table, the Knights of the Round Table together, and then of course directing them towards something, right? But it's just an interesting style of leadership that we've heard of in the past, and people will talk about Abraham Lincoln with his team of rivals. And I do think RFK Jr. talked to Trump about that idea. At some point, I think I heard that.
Well, technically, it was the Unity Party that was at the 1864, after the Civil War was coming to its end, that Abraham Lincoln had a wild top hat idea to have a Democrat that was a copperhead basically join the ticket as his running mate. And unfortunately, that didn't work out too well for Lincoln because it wasn't just the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, but his whole cabinet and his VP it was all of them at once. The vice president, who happened to be a Democrat, happened to survive because the guy who was going to kill him got too drunk. That sounds very sus to me. And then he took the Republican position for 1865 for 1 year and then left it. And then the reason why the Reconstruction happened the way it did was because the Democrat in power, who was not supposed to be, let all his friends get away with the Civil War, which is a really wild story. But the the unity thing, I don't think we're going to see that because that's coming down the road,
right,
or later. But it's like, it is interesting because it is bringing up that 1776 as well. 13 colonies with totally different ideas. The South having the tobacco, having the tea, the North with the trade understandings and a lot of different aspects with fur and all the, back then it was about all those things and about trade. And it was also about like printing presses were up, New York, Philadelphia, like in all these more major hub cities. And in the South, it was very rural. There's some nice homes and so forth, but it was mainly about plantations and all these things. And what do you do with like, how do we all see this the same way? How are we going to govern? We're really going to go against a king. Never tried that before. We tried it in the English Civil War, and that would have been like their great-grandparents. Like that would have been like their great-great-grandparents, like who lived that. And we're like, well, that didn't turn out too hot.
Yeah.
But the idea of making it a republic, which really a lot of that came from, looking at common sense and looking at, the pamphlets that came out prior that kind of defined what it could look like. Mm-hmm. And that's what's kind of been happening with Twitter or X or RFK. That's like this whole thing. And Trump does feel very much kind of the King Arthur one who's just like bringing them all together and somehow has this like way of like this. Okay, he has the sword to be able to like make the Camelot happen and everybody now go and fill the roles to go do it. It's so funny in the Camelot actual story, King Arthur's really not the main character. Mm-hmm. He's kind of just like it reminds me in astrology, he's kind of like the son that shows up at all the 12 at the round table, the Knights of the Round Table, or then you have like these kind of outer parts like Merlin or Lady of the Lake. You have all these other different characters that are associated with those 12, but mainly like Lancelot, right? You have Gawain, or you have like, Elaine. It's so funny they rhyme. And you hear more about all those kind of stories, but the stuff with, Arthur is mainly Mordred, like at the end. And so it's going to be an interesting, like 2.0 Camelot here. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I don't think that's what people are seeing, unfortunately, which is kind of sad.
It's interesting because in the chat, I noticed a couple of comments, so that I see a lot of places, and that understandably on the other side, people have different perspectives. So one of the comments was, it was a good political strategy for him to bring these people together, right?
Totally.
But I would say if that was a political strategy, the Democratic Party should have taken up RFK Jr. on his presidential bid early on.
Right.
If it was about, leveraging him politically too, that he actually was trying to win the bid for the Democratic presidency, as Tulsi Gabbard had in the past as well. And so we see a lot of these very innovative thinkers who don't really fit into the party the way that it was defined by the top leadership. They were rejected and not asked, not invited to come in and contribute.
Yeah.
So I don't know so much whether it was a strategy by Trump, because I thought he was supposed to be confused from that other side, right? The other side is that he's so confused and he doesn't know who he is and where he is. So I guess he just stumbled upon this great strategy. Anyway,
it wasn't even a strategy.
I don't feel that it
RFK wasn't trying to see what side will give him a better deal.
Right.
Right.
Or
his whole thing was running as an independent. The Democrats wouldn't let him run, right? Which was crazy. And then once he got enough, signatures to be on ballots, they wouldn't give him Secret Service protection. Mm-hmm. Then Trump got shot. So RFK called him, and then RFK and him in 2016 had the meeting when Trump was in the same position he is now. He became president-elect. He invited him over. They talked about vaccines, stuff like that. And then Dr. Fauci is the one who said, no, Trump, don't work with him, and pushed him away. So they've already been friends for many years, whatever. they have the talk after the assassination, and that's when Tucker Carlson had just had that one couple on that's been working really deep in health and all this stuff and works with RFK. And then Trump's like, yeah, I've been working on this whole health thing because they got up to that. And he goes, oh, I know them. And then they were like, he's like, no way. And then they called, and then they started to have talks about that at the RNC. And then they don't want the wars because he said the three things that we agree on, we don't agree on everything. But the top three, which are no more war, health, and I think the third one was the bureaucracies and all the takeover of all these federal agencies and the corruption.
Right.
And so, to me, it's like, okay, Kamala didn't have anything but abortion, so she didn't run on anything else. So, it's really interesting that they didn't want to discuss anything with him. Well, they didn't take the meeting. So
she was running on the fact that she wasn't Trump.
I know
that Trump was going to be Hitler.
That or the abortion or Mark Cuban's ideas with business.
So, another comment was, why don't any of his past advisors talk to him anymore, or something along that lines, which I've heard. And this is where I said, I think, he's had obviously he's had a lot of time to think, I guess, in the past 4 years. And one of the things is that obviously he's not choosing the same people again, right? And he's said many times that he chose sort of the wrong people. He didn't know the type of people to choose.
He wasn't a politician.
He came into DC. So it's just I feel like we're obviously moving on and we're moving forward. But all I was wanting to point out here, and I think what we're trying to talk about, is how interesting it is to see the bringing together of all these different perspectives and different types of people that I don't think we've really seen in this way. And yes, it did help Trump win the election. Because, and it was never, the thing is why it's such a surprise is that the mainstream media was never showing the millions of people who are the type of people that would tune into Joe Rogan's podcast, for example, right? So people just didn't understand the widespread diverse support for democracy of a different type, right? A democracy that didn't involve fact-checking in one particular way only, or determining what's
or
misinformation.
Hearsay conversations from past administration officials, because he had the highest turnover rate of letting people go in his administration, because you fire people. He was a huge businessman. He did have a show where all he did was go, "You're fired." You're sucking at the job. But the main thing was, he went in there, and this is where the astrology comes in. He's a Sun and Uranus conjunct during an eclipse with the North Node there.
Wow.
Uranus is going to turn people over, right? Like, I'm willing to talk to everybody. I'm excited. It might look good. You know what? No, it's not. Oh, that's okay. Whatever. I'm letting you go. Let's see the next thing. So, and use the astrology. But like that, the whole funny thing is he even said, like, yeah, I mean, I actually didn't think I was going to win in 2016. And then I had to like pick all these people, and it's all these bureaucratic people. Like, think about Fauci. He was there for 40 years. So if you were just coming in, you would, a very Iranian, curious Gemini would be like, well, he does factually, he's been here for 40 years. So maybe I'll listen to him. RFK is like a kind of an old friend. He kind of has some different views on things. And they're saying that they're not the right views. Okay, I'm gonna listen. This is, if you're not in there and you have to hire 1,000 people. Mm-hmm. Okay, let me like kind of listen, and then as I go through, I'll learn and I'll mix and match. So when you have Mark Milley coming and saying these things, one of the generals, who's upset because he's been a general now for Biden, he stayed on, right? And it was an atrocious situation in Afghanistan and all these kind of crazy situations. Of course, he wants to stay on Kamala's staff. So he's going to say whatever he wants. Mm-hmm. Or if you look at the bureaucratic kind of like way, they've all been career politicians that we never elected, that got put in positions by other presidents and executives that hired them and keep them on. So you're always going to say whatever you got to say to keep your job. And so like that, and that was the thing, that's like kind of basic understanding of that stuff. Mm-hmm. And they're really scared because, I mean, if we're 35 trillion in debt, unfortunately, we have to get to that point where we have to cut a lot of things off. So that's what Elon's in charge of. And Ron Paul just got asked to join, which I was a huge, to be honest, like I'm a libertarian, like, cause I was a Ron Paul 2008, 2012. Mm-hmm. But that was my first volunteer in politics, was with Ron Paul. Right. He of course didn't make it. I voted for Obama in 2008, but it started with Ron Paul. Mm-hmm. So Ron Paul, who's in his 80s, he's like choked up because he's been pushing this in Congress when he was a congressman for 40 plus years, and the Federal Reserve, all these things we never had in America, and we did better than we ever have been. And finally, Elon, who runs businesses, did the same thing at X. Why do you need 80% of these people here? Bye, get rid of them. So what's happened is most of Virginia, where a lot of people live in Washington, they're tripping out. There's 2-3 million people, and all the jobs over the last 4 years were government jobs. The jobs report of October, that came out this Monday, right before the election, only 12,000 jobs were added to the economy. 12,000, and they kept going back. They would say, a couple 100,000, and they retracted. Oh, it was actually like 50. Like they've been doing that for 4 years. And so the American people that fell for the mainstream BS, the Neptunian age of deception, it's sad because they weren't seeing that they were fudging the numbers there. The crime numbers, they didn't include at Los Angeles, New York, Chicago to make it seem like crime was low. And then today, the whole entire media was literally like Chris Matthews, who, gosh, he's been around for 50 years, just leveled with everybody and said, the crime's the worst it's ever been. The immigration, why do you think that they lost? How did you guys, he told all the MSNBC people, why have you been telling them lies? I was like, what the heck is going on right now? They're waking them up now.
Okay, well, I mean, there's so much to talk about. I'm really curious because I don't think we've ever looked at Elon Musk's horoscope before. I don't know if you want to look at his natal chart, or have we looked at it?
Oh, I know it. I mean, I did last night with Robert Phoenix. He's double Cancer, right?
Well, so what I'm wondering is this, because you already, earlier off camera, you had said that, you had an idea of who might be the new Benjamin Franklin.
That's RFK.
Right, and Benjamin Franklin was a Capricorn with Pluto
Libra, Leo, yeah.
And so what's the deal with that Cancer Capricorn axis? Why are they playing a big part?
So in Trump's chart, he's got Cancer and Capricorn intercepted.
Oh, really?
In his 5th and 11th house. So that makes it really odd. It might actually be his 6th and 12th. It's his. I can actually pull up his chart and show people. But yeah, that's what's really interesting is the interceptions there. Plus, RFK is an eclipse as well.
Oh, wow.
And then Trump has Saturn and Venus that rule both his 6th house, and it also is the co-ruler of his 10th house, dealing with work, are in Cancer. Conjunct. Venus-Saturn conjunction in Cancer. Right? Then Trump has been in his, if you want to use the Hellenistic astrology, he's been in his lot of spirit Capricorn. Right? Mm-hmm. So he's in the Capricorn phase, and where he did have his loosening of the bond, the Cancer aspect. So he's in a Capricorn, Cancer, lot of spirit timing.
I think that, Oh, I'm sorry. You were still... No,
you're good.
Because, of course, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, I think it would be good to look at Donald Trump's chart, but also to see whether or not, to see, is he going to become a dictator? Maybe you could alleviate people's fears on that.
I mean, before we even look at it, I'm going to look at camera. Do you really think a Sun conjunct Uranus in any house with a North Node is going to be a dictator? The guy likes to hang out with people. Dictators like to hang out by themselves. Has Trump ever been alone?
I don't know.
No, he's always out. He's wanting to hang out. He's playing golf. He's shaking hands with people. He's hanging out with people. It's not like he's going up to Mar-a-Lago by himself or going up to, his Austrian, hang out and just sitting up there with Eva Braun and just like tripping out on drugs. He didn't even do drugs either, right? No, a Sun Uranus person doesn't.
But I forgot, actually. J.D. Vance is the dictator in training.
No. What was the irony was the dictatorship was happening in front of our face, right? My body, my choice. No, nobody had that choice through OSHA. Where we were with look at how the media was, the fact that the Hunter Biden laptop was lied about by 61, people from all of the 3-letter agencies. That's dictatorship. That's fascism. When you look at all of the Green New Deal things, all of the 64 billion for the internet that was going to happen, and they haven't even installed one internet in anybody, but all that money to all those private companies. Fascism, yeah, you can look at authoritarianism and centralization and populism and all those things, but actually the core fascism is when you get private and government to merge together and start doing crazy crap. Right? Which is kind of ironic because you really can't start to get mad about fascism if you really look at it. NASA uses SpaceX to get things up. So technically, if you want to get at real deep core fascism, instead of looking at the psychological part of it, because what they're hitting is the one psychological part, but if you want to go into poli-sci, fascism is like the act of the government and the private entities coming more into an alignment, right? And then the opposite is true when you go to Marxism, right? It's like there is no private allowed, right? So there's a pendulum of far right, far left, fascism's far right, Marxism / communism's far left. Anarchy is all the way off the scale to nothing, and full totalitarian, beyond communistic, I would say extreme, just, I'm keeping you in a cage and I'm your owner, and you're never allowed to leave, and I'm going to torture you, is the far of the other end of anarchy.
Yeah. But here's what's so interesting about the fact that you're even talking about that, or that we've continued to bring that up, I think, over these shows, is for us to even be so worried about a dictatorship, for example, or, whatever is the big fear, is showing us that people have been distracted from the issues of just looking at who's running and what are the policies that are going to affect us, right? And I think that a lot of people see abortion as that issue, but it was the issue that was brought up by the Harris campaign, and so many other things, right? So many other issues were happening in the world right now, and they just weren't being addressed, and there was not an effort to define the issues and how, for example, how the Harris campaign would take care of them, I think. And instead, so much emphasis. I mean, I heard this over and over again from so many different people that they were tired of just hearing about Hitler, right? About how Trump was Hitler. But I think that was part of the distraction, or that was the distraction, so that we didn't actually look at what was happening or what's going on or what were the issues really at stake.
I mean, when you look at the charts of Hitler per se, if we're going to use him as the example, 0 degree Taurus, Libra rising, Mars and Venus conjunct in Taurus, right? You would look at that chart and you would see the artist in him, because he was an artist, right? He was a writer. He wrote Mein Kampf. It's a very if you were to give it to a Gen Z TikTok astrologer, which I bet you they don't even know his chart, right? If I were to just be oh, look at this person's chart, it's my grandpa, right? Oh, he was probably such a nice guy and cared so much about the arts and da-da-da-da, they would not see the dictator part in that.
Right.
But it's that Mars-Venus conjunction with that Mars retrograde over that Venus in Taurus. And then, of course, in, you know, my crazy schools, I show people the progression of his son that came on top of that when he was young. And then, of course, how close his Pluto was, that when it crossed his Pluto was when he went into that extreme zone, right? And also the signs, and then looking at a lot of other aspects of it all. But like, you know, there was a lot of things in Hitler's chart through his progressions and through his weird Mars-Venus conjunction. Like big conjunctions with like planets that are exact, like Diddy, for example, Jupiter-Venus conjunction in Libra, right? The really Venus in its home sign, a great benefic with Jupiter, with a benefic in the lower benefic in its best place. Oh yeah, that's too many. That's him pushing too much. So like another Venus situation in its home sign, that Mars conjunct it, and then that really interesting way that his Pluto sits, and that was what was interesting, was Pluto was discovered in 1930 during Hitler, after, you know, World War I, and after he wrote Mein Kampf in 25 and the jail cell and so forth. It's like after the insurrection that he tried, right? So I think they're like, what they're doing is they're taking pieces of Hitler's history and they're just throwing them together. Like, number one, Trump was never charged with insurrection, right? So technically it wasn't an insurrection. Two, and it wasn't a successful one, and there was no, Trump himself didn't go in there, and Trump himself did not tell people to go storm the Capitol and break in and do all that shit, right? So where you have actually the interesting part of like Hitler, actually like in the first one when he was young, in the first parts of that Nazi party, it wasn't even his party. He just showed up when he was in Vienna and like looking around and like was drawing, and then he went back home and then went into a Nazi room and then had nowhere to go and just started talking to these people and realized that they didn't really have anybody to want to lead anything. And so he slowly took it over, and took him a long time to even get that party. And then he got it to where there was like 12 different parties that would run in those elections back then. And then he was able to get them down to like 6. So at least, and the Nazi party never really did win. They made him vice chancellor because they just wanted him kind of out of, it's like so crazy. They don't know the history.
Yeah, or they do. And now, I mean, they do bits and pieces. And I think that as you're saying that, it's reminding me, okay, so they're thinking of MAGA as the party, like the Nazis. J.D. Vance is the vice president, like the vice chancellor. But it's bits and pieces of the story, but it shifts all the time, right? And I'm just really over this labeling of Hitler, right? As a historian, you see that all the time, and we really have to get away from this. The person who wins a debate is the first person that calls someone else Hitler. So right. It's not, we need to look at the historical reality of right now, right? I mean, I know we're looking at patterns and how they repeat, but if there's a system to, especially how you're looking at it, right? You have an idea of what you're looking for that is what's happening astrologically today. And then we look at the history through that lens. But there is a structure that we're going by. It's not, I think this is the thing that I feel has gotten so out of control in the last few years, is the more there's an insistence on science, the more there was a lack of it, in that it just became, how are we going to narrate this story in the press, or who's going to tell the story first? It's just, I think people are so fed up with politics and how the media works with it and how it's pitting everybody against each other. So
well, and the republic that was in Germany at that time is not the same kind of republic that is in American politics. And so when he was vice chancellor, his party was like second, third place, right? It's a lot like how parliaments work.
Yeah.
And so when he became chancellor after the death of the chancellor, he then, because of his own party, just redid the whole way the whole system works and changed it within and just made it so, and people just rallied with it, and he just made it, right? So that'd be like Trump saying, we're not America anymore, everybody's following me, and that's the end of the game. Mm-hmm. That wouldn't happen in an American system. So it's like, you know, like that's how fragile that republic was, the Weimar Republic and all that stuff, and all the old, you know, the old guard of the very, and we have to remember too, there was like a bitter pill that Hitler swallowed in World War I and thought they were so weak for, you know, signing the Treaty of Versailles in France with the French. So he really had it out for the French, like in a big way. Like the move against Poland was just to see if his military could do it. And then when they did, then that's when he went into France, you know? And it's like, and then he set up the rail cars exactly how it was, because he was injured bad in the war. So it's really, it's just like, it's like, where's Trump's vengeance against the people when, like, you know, I thought it was funny when he was like at the Catholic dinner that Camelot didn't show up to, and Chuck Schumer sitting right next to him, and he goes, oh, Chuck, I was your first one to donate to you. Right? So he was donating to Democrats. Hillary Clinton was at his wedding, and Bill Clinton. Mm-hmm. He had the #1 show on NBC for all those years. So he's been with every, like, I have his letters to Trump book. Oprah wanted him to run with her.
Right.
So why are they all coming and saying Hitler when, if they were to say that, then I'll just pull out letters of Trump and be like, you all were with Hitler, Trump, whatever, right? Like, it's so stupid. It's so stupid.
Yeah, it just falls apart. It's not, I don't know why we're still talking about it.
If any,
giving it too much attention.
Well, I would say, like, to kind of end it historically, because we're in the same Uranus cycle as Hitler's come up. So I could see how that's echoing. But it was interesting because it actually started with Biden when he went in front of Philadelphia, where that's where the Declaration of Independence was. And he had the red lights on, and he had the 2 Marines standing behind him all in black. And he did his speech just casting away MAGA Republicans are the worst. And like, that's how Hitler used to speak, right? Was looking in that way. And then the opposition party being like, they're going to destroy this place while you're in power, right? Mm-hmm. While you're actually forcing and censoring and doing all the things that Hitler did, which was Biden. Mm-hmm. Or Putin and how his idea of being a president is, right? That's a closer representative to Hitler invading countries like this moment with Ukraine and trying to take back old land. Because remember that Hitler was trying to gain the old German Republic back. Austria, all these things were our old places that we needed to get back, that we lost in the little trenches that got us 1 to 2 to 3 to 5 meters and hundreds of thousands to millions of people dead at a time. Mm-hmm. Where's Trump going to go on the planet that he's trying to gain back for America? There's nowhere. Using Hitler's ideology of motivation.
There's just so many echoes from these other times, though, as you're speaking. There's so much about right now that is a return to many of those fears and ideas, things that were happening. So, like, let's look at Hitler's time, as you talked about, because let's still talk about Hitler.
Right.
I mean, but we're talking about the era that came out of World War I, and he was a World War I veteran, right? After that war, the war that was supposed to be, was that the Great War, right? The war that was supposed to end all wars. Because how could you continue to fight when that war killed so many people, spent so much time in these stalemates where people were just doing senseless acts of supposed bravery, but people were being slaughtered. And after that, there was such a peace movement where people did not want to go back to war, which explains so much about why Chamberlain was, agreed to Hitler. And so I think people think now, well, we're not going to do that again with Putin.
Right.
Right. So we're not going to give him the chance. But then so much of this election also, I know that younger males really don't want to have to be drafted or go to war in Ukraine or anywhere in the Middle East or whatever. So much of this, did I say war? So much of this election cycle was about war, right? That
yeah, a lot of people voted for that for their kids in war more than abortion.
Just, yeah, we would like to get out of the wars.
Right.
When you have the Amish coming out en masse too, right? It's about farming, and that was an issue in for Germany, right? If you're going to expand in the middle of the 20th century as a nation, they wanted to have the land to be able to grow the German people and all of Hitler's ideas about that, right? So again, and I mean, a lot of the same regions of Europe were being fought over because they're still great farmlands or they're very rich minerally.
Right.
And we're still fighting over the same things. So we have now people standing up and saying, we don't want to do all of this. So that's interesting. And then the other thing is to have RFK Jr. back in the picture, to have a Kennedy, right? After, and I was asking you earlier about the fact that when Chiron was in Aries before, Robert Kennedy was assassinated.
Right.
So not when JFK was, but RFK Jr.'s father was killed in 1968, maybe in May, I don't remember I had looked that up at one point, but also Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated when Chiron was in Aries. Mm-hmm. And so it almost feels like, and Robert Kennedy was running for president. There were riots at the Democratic Convention that year, very similar to what was happening this year with Gaza.
Nixon came into power after losing to, so, you know, that's what's kind of weird about the Trump thing too. Oh, that's on your screen there. That's what's weird about this Trump moment too with Chiron and Aries is there is a Chiron Aries kind of Nixon moment. He lost to JFK in 1960, and by 68, he comes back and wins his election and actually becomes president in 68.
And Vietnam was such a big
and then goes right into Vietnam, right? Like, and is the instigator with Johnson's motivations prior to that, right? So, you know, that's kind of like an interesting, But what's weird about it is like, I'm going to tag the Hitler thing one more time mixed with this is World War I, World War II, America wasn't involved till Europe needed our help both times. So the idea that like America is going to go start World War III, like obviously we kind of set ourselves up World War II, giving our old munitions, tanks, ships to England. That's what we're doing to Ukraine right now. Right? So we kind of set ourselves up to kind of be like, we come at the last minute, we help out. Right? If you were to really like look at it like from that place, and then you come back to like Vietnam is more of like, oh yeah, we're going to go over there because we're trying to get rid of communism. After the McCarthy 50s, right, of communistic, you know, energy. And that was because of after World War II and really what happened with the nuclear program, which unfortunately in America, we did take all the Nazi scientists. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like it cracked open, I think, subconsciously for people, because what they need to look at is the reason why we have an atom bomb is because of von Braun, a German Nazi scientist who was making the V2 rockets. The reason that we have like a lot of our technology, even like maybe all these UAP and UFO things, it was the Nazis who came up with UFO technology and saucers and all the drawings of them all. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah. Or why did Hitler go to Alaska or to Antarctica? Why did he go to Egypt, and why did he go to all these places looking for artifacts? Ancient artifacts? Or why did he use the swastika, the Buddhist symbol, a spiritual symbol, for it? There's a weird part of that whole story, but I'm sorry to say, Trump's not that spiritual. That's the weird part. Putin's extremely Christian, Eastern Orthodox Christian. Hitler was an occultist.
Mm-hmm.
And then Trump is neither. Middle of the road, like, hi, I'm Christian, thanks. Don't know much about it. Not reading my Bible and not going to church on Sunday, but thanks for praying for me. And something happened to me that I feel like God's in my life. Pretty big, like normal of the road, meaning like he's not a fundamentalist Christian, or he's not basing his whole strategy off his spiritual ideologies. So actually more dictator things can have that really fundamental, like kind of, if you're in the right-wing fascism aspect of it, it's got a religious element to it. You're not seeing that from Trump. Trump's not that religious.
But I would think that maybe people would say, but they keep it hidden, right? So Hitler,
he put the Bible backwards, upside down. He didn't. And they asked him in 2016. So, what's your favorite part of the Bible, the New Testament or Old Testament? He's like, both. What verse do you like? I like both. I like the whole thing. He doesn't know. He doesn't even know what verse is in there.
But he wouldn't tell you if he did.
He doesn't know what verse.
But
He did use a King James Bible.
But what is interesting, it's be something we should probably have official show about one day, because I know you've looked into this, but Hitler really did use astrology and the occult in the symbolism and in the way that they built the architecture and the way they lined it up according to certain directions, right? So it definitely was there, and if you knew what you were looking for, it would be there. But right now, is there something about the astrology of today where, because we can get lost in looking for the hidden background meaning of things, and I feel like it's been a strategy to keep people disengaged, to get them off onto these red herrings of, you're going to look for this and that. And we've talked about it in the past, right? But things like the Freemasons will continue to come up.
Right.
But I do think that maybe right now we want to look deeper into those sorts of things, but not so deep that you're distracted from the everyday things. And I think that's what brings me back to someone like Elon Musk being important. And also, I'm trying to think of the other people, but I feel like bringing in these people who know about industries or who know about business on a practical level, who aren't necessarily politicians, is trying to get things back to the solutions, or getting back to everyday things that need to be fixed.
Right. Well, I just thought, we got a lot of people watching. And I think, I know that, let's just have fun for a second. This is Trump's chart synastry with Adolf Hitler.
With Hitler.
Right?
Okay.
So first, though, we'll just look at Adolf Hitler for a second. I'll make it to where it's easier to see. All right. So there's that Venus retrograde on his Mars. I had flipped that one. And if you notice, he has his Pluto at 4 degrees of Gemini, his Sun. So he has Sun, Pluto pretty close, 34 years. So at 34 years old, his Sun crossed Pluto, right? But when he was young at 16, he had that progressed Sun past that Mars-Venus conjunction. But there's a benefic in its home sign, domicile, and it's retrograde, and then Mars conjunct that Venus exact. So looking at that chart already, seeing Venus in the retrograde, only doing 26 minutes retrograde, that, the Cazimi was on its way. So it's like when you think it's a 40-day, 40-night transit, but already had started, you could just use in any chart program or use an ephemeris. That's the easier way if you don't have chart program money. And you look at that Venus, and you see that at 31 years old, Adolf Hitler had the ruler of his ascendant, Libra rising, Venus, stationed direct. So add his progression, 30 days. That's also when he progressed from Taurus into Gemini, where his Pluto and Neptune exactly sit at 0, right there. 0 Neptune, Pluto at 4. So that weird period is where he loses it. And then when Uranus crossed over there after it left it left Taurus, is when he started losing it and injecting bull semen, and he was on methamphetamine, and he was on like 15 other drugs. He also has a South Node conjunct Jupiter, okay, in Capricorn at detriment or at fall position with the moon in Capricorn. He's got North Node Chiron in Cancer, right? He's never felt like home, and he didn't even feel home in Germany. You know how much time he spent in Berlin with all the stuff that he built? 2% of his time. He was in Austria 98% of the time, ran the war, everything, up at his whatever that thing was called.
I can never remember.
I know, the Berg Heist, or whatever the house was in Austria.
I don't know.
Right? So he wasn't even at home.
He was Austrian, though, so he was at home. But
not the home of what he was doing.
Yeah.
Not the country, but he turned it back into a country. But, you know, he had Saturn in square to that Mars, Venus. Looking at that chart and seeing that the ruler of that ascendant, that's where a Leo rising is a different bird, because it's a Leo or a Cancer rising are the only two risings that are ruled by the luminaries. They don't retrograde. So when you see somebody's chart and it's Venus in this case, and so you run that progress chart for a sec for people, and then you do the history, right? So it's like, I've done this in my classes, so for some people, but it's always fun to go back, right? So it's like, let's go, if he's born in 1889, right? Grover Cleveland came in back in 1892.
Yeah.
Right? So he was...
I think it's 1889 though, isn't it? I had it. Let me look.
So you add 30 years to... so 1929?
1885.
Right? So let's go back now, days or years. And let's go to where we see that Venus station direct. So Venus stations direct in 1921. Okay? Comes all the way back to 2 degrees of Taurus here, right? And so all you have to do is go, all right, what was Hitler doing in 1921? And the beginning of him finding the Nazi party, because the World War I was 1917, 1918, the peaks of it, right? And so the war ended in 1918, basically, right? So it's the 3 years after, 1921, Hitler. Adolf Hitler becomes the leader of the Nationalist Socialist German, the Nazi Party, in 1921.
The year is Venus.
The year the ruler of his ascendant, Venus, stations direct in his secondary progression chart. So what does this mean? When you look at a dictator or somebody like this, and he has Mars conjunct it, and it's in detriment, he's already built for a weird life. And I hate to say this, if you're not a Leo rising or Cancer rising, you're not that stable. You can change like a fucking motherfucker on a dime. That's why Leo rising and Cancer ascendant has always been, in an old astrology, they used to give Mercury the rulership because they thought it was like, well, maybe that's unfair. Mercury's on both sides, right? Gemini and Virgo, and that's always the messenger to the sun and the moon, right? Right? It's the pages. So you can always look at the natal Mercury, but even that's a quick retrograde, right? It's 3 weeks, so, you know, like, okay, that's 21 days, 21 years in somebody's chart, and it depends on a Mercury situation, but that's always not such a serious situation. That's already the beginning of like, oh, okay. And then you just follow in the chart like, okay, so that happens. His progressed sun was on his Neptune while he was in the war, where he did get hit. There was a grenade that went off. It made him have hard hearing, went through a lot of weird stuff, right? So he also, something probably went wrong in his head. He has that Neptune in the 8th. He has Pluto in the 8th house too. Pluto in the 8th. Right? In Gemini.
Like Isaac Newton.
Right? I mean, yeah, there is really weird relations with that kind of connection too. But you know, you could go through this whole thing and we could spend hours, because I have, and show every moment when he does the insurrection 4 years after this, when it's progressed sun over that Pluto, right? or use the solar arcs, you could start to see that progressed Venus as it comes. Like this is where it's that you could see that his progressed new moon is building up. You can't really see it here, but he joins the Nazi party as the progressed moon's in Pisces. Let me show that here. I showed bi-wheel. There we go. And there you go. Progressed moon in Pisces. So you just do the math. It's already done its 3/4 square. Okay. So that's a little over a week, right? It's about a week away, right? So you go, okay, it's like 7 more years away. It's getting closer. And so you start counting. And so, yeah, he has this progressed new moon over that Pluto in the 8th when he starts to really come up into becoming a vice chancellor energy that he's doing in the insurrection, right before that, the insurrection and writing Mein Kampf and all that. And then you start to see that progressed Venus come up. You start to see the other aspects start happening. And it's just so easy to see. It's so easy to see. And then the natal transits that are happening in the chart. There's nothing like that with Trump. There's nothing like that with anybody that we're really truly seeing. Or J.D. Vance, too. He's a Leo rising. He's a Leo ascendant.
Huh, interesting. And what's the impact of Pluto on all of these people? Because I think Elon Musk would have just had Pluto oppose his sun, right? He went through that transit already. He's
earlier. He went through that beginning of the cycle, and that's when he takes the big risk with SpaceX and Tesla, like bigger.
And are J.D. Vance and Trump having it? Well, okay. Vance's sun is almost near where yours is.
Yeah, right? That's a long time away. It's like 6 years away.
Okay.
Right. So Trump, about 4 years away from Pluto, opposite Pluto. Right. And he has Pluto in the 12th. Right. And that, if you use whatever house system you want to use, he has Scorpio is his 3rd house ruler because he has the Capricorn interception.
And interceptions are areas where you have lessons or?
Where the soul has not, in a past life, did not work on those 2 areas. So it also shows you where there's also another set of signs that have 2 houses in them. So if I go to Trump's chart, which I have right here, Trump, that you can see here that we can all see that, right? Okay. That you can see that he has Cancer and that he has Capricorn intercepted in the 5th and the 11th house. So the rulers of those, right? The planetary rulers to those signs, Saturn and the luminary moon. So what makes it harder, the hardest interceptions are Cancer, Capricorn, and Leo, Aquarius. Because they both deal with Saturn. One deals with Saturn / Uranus. But they deal with luminaries where you cannot co-rule. Right? So the moon has nowhere to go. He's born on a lunar eclipse. He also, in his prenatal eclipses, which I've shown, he doesn't have a prenatal lunar eclipse. He has prenatal solar eclipses because he was born on a lunar eclipse. So it's weirder because also it does not make the 12th house for a Leo rising Cancer. This is where the whole sign people really fuck up. That based off him, Trump's 12th house is the sun, but it's also his 1st house, the sun, right? Leo. So he has 2 Leo houses. 12th house Leo, 1st house Leo. Right? And so that gives him an Aquarius 6th and 7th house. So the problem, and why you see an Elon Musk or why you also see a RFK, are Capricorn Cancer is where this Pluto axis was. It's also where he won the first election, Mars crossing over the 29th degree of Capricorn, right? He won. It's also even weirder now that Pluto's been there and he won again, but also with Mars in the opposite place. And it was Mars crossing over in 2016. So I said in my thing, it might feel like 2016 all over again. And it did. But that's where it gets to where looking at his Saturn Venus, okay, Venus rules his 10th. You could see, oh yeah, so Scorpio rules his fourth. So his intercepted weird house is the sixth house, basically, that should be Capricorn, but it's not. It's Aquarius. So what's weird about Trump is Saturn and Pluto met in Capricorn right there at 22 degrees during his presidency in 2020 in an intercepted house, right? Uh-oh. It all didn't go well for him there. So interceptions go, you have to learn this life, and it's a must-do life, meaning that you will do it. You chose this life to finish this, but you have issues with Capricorn and Cancer. So his home life and his work life.
Interesting.
Right? So he's got Mar-a-Lago, where he works out of, and then his work is building homes, and then his family is intertwined with his work. So actually, people should be a little bit more happy that it's not family that he's propping up to work in the administration, like it was the first time. Mm-hmm. Right? That's the deeper lesson nobody's seeing.
Interesting.
Because of the interception.
Wow.
Right? That's where it's like he'll probably keep that more back-doored, closed-doored. When it's front door, though, Capricorn shown to the public, it's bad. The other thing, too, is that, looking at his chart, being with Uranus, that's what makes him so unique and different. And with him, he's got Saturn conjunct Venus, but there's no weird Venus retrograde or Saturn retrograde on it. And his Mars is, semi-sextile to that almost, right? There in Leo. That's really where the interesting part is Uranus just squared that Mars when Mars conjuncted Uranus at 26 degrees of Taurus, the assassination attempt happened in Butler, Pennsylvania. Right? So that's never going to happen in his life again. That was once in a lifetime, and it happened on that exact day that he got shot. So that's how I knew it wasn't fake, because that'll never happen again. And Mars is traditional for a Leo rising 9th house, and he has it there. So he's going to work through it. That's where Leo rising gets that extra help. Aries is the 9th house. If you just show up with courage and strength, and he got up bleeding and saying, fight, 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 that's playing a Leo ascendant. Right? If you play a weak white dudes for Harris as a Leo rising, you're not going to have a good life. Right? So, but this chart, is not one that screams, oh my God, dictator, right? It screams, I want to be seen, but I really want to be doing things to help people. That's what he's done his whole life. Whether, when the comments were made from Mark Cuban, right? It's like you had, speaking of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., his niece, who supports Trump and came out, and right? So you have people of Martin Luther King Jr.'s family stepping up for Trump in the last week. You have so many leaders from, I could go on, for the list is insane, the amount of people, right? So the whole story, though, is that Hitler was a loner. This is not the chart of a loner.
Yeah.
Dictators like to be lonely. Stalin.
Well.
But the interception to me is the interesting part. Hitler didn't have an interception. Libra risings usually don't. Some do. The Libra risings that have interceptions definitely have a bigger problem, because Libra is usually where it equals out, whether you're in the spring or the summer. And that's what's weird, is because Hitler's born in the spring. So, but it's not that weird, because it's like Libra risings usually where you see the equaling out. So if you're in a spring, or if you're in a winter chart, you'll usually see, you're always going to find, whether you're in Alaska, when you see the charts go, really why I've showed this to many people in class, right? Where it goes, why is it three signs wide, one house? Well, because, it's winter and it's in the daytime. So that means the sun from the eastern horizon to the western horizon is only going to be 4 hours. So when I show people going over a minute, you're seeing the sun jump houses by 30 minutes, jump over the sky because it goes so fast. But it has to find an equal point. In every chart, there's an equal moment. And so usually Libra rising is an equal, it'll like equalize the houses. But it's when you see a Libra rising with an interception that you have to go, what's going on?
Hitler did not have an interception though, right?
Yeah, from what I remember, he didn't.
I feel like when we, looking at Donald Trump's chart, didn't Abraham Lincoln, when we looked at his, doesn't he have an interception like that as well? Was it Capricorn and Aquarius? I feel like I remember.
I don't remember. But, and sometimes it could be Chiron themes, like, that North Node Chiron was pretty intense because we have to remember that during Hitler's come up and into World War II as the Fuhrer was Pluto in Cancer, all over his Chiron, all over his North Node. We're never going to see Pluto cross Trump's North Node or J.D. Vance's North Node. They're both North Node Geminis. What was weird about the selection was J.D. Vance, Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, all three North Node Geminis. Pluto will never cross either three of their North Nodes in their life. Pluto crossed all their South Nodes. So when you see Pluto in the North Node, Rahu is the dragon. And whenever Pluto's crossing somebody's, so the most dangerous people are going to be North Node Aquarians for the next 20 years. The dictators will be a North Node Aquarius. Anybody with a North Node Aquarius, that Pluto North Node conjunction is the most darkest situation. It's not your ultimate destiny. It's your destiny to see your shadow and if you're going to do the darkest, craziest shit. Right? So it's not about, it's about a lot of things when you do dictators and charts and history, but you have to know the history and use history to understand like what the person did and then reflect it back. So when I look at Donald Trump's chart, it's like, okay, Trump's going to have a Uranus return in Gemini that's going to start beginning, but that's kind of a whiles away, right? Like we got about 4 or 5 years, right? And that's like when he's going to end the term, possibly, if he makes it to that, right? That's not dictatorship. Dictatorship is Pluto crossing the North Node. Dictatorship is having a really weird Venus conjunct Mars, exactly, stationing direct, and you join the Nazi party, the ruler of your ascendant, the exact year it goes stationary direct.
Yeah, that's weird.
Right? So, what was the other chart we were going to look at? I guess we could look at thinking of like the Camelot thing and going back to like JFK's chart, because that's really where Camelot comes in, and even before that 1960 timing, because that's what you and I were talking about prior to this, is that Saturn-Jupiter conjunction happening in Capricorn at the end. And then we all saw that in 2020. So Jupiter-Saturn cycles every 20 years, every 60 years, they come back and repeat in a really interesting way. But this was the first time in Aquarius for them to meet at 0 Aquarius. But so if I go to 1960...
And we were looking at this in particular and thinking about Camelot.
Correct.
Because, one of the Kennedys, or one of the way the Kennedys were discussed, especially in the 60s, was that they were like the new Camelot, right? They were bringing back Camelot. And it was even something that Jackie Kennedy mentioned the first time she publicly spoke after her husband had been assassinated. Right, and she talks about how they'll never be a Camelot now because his life was taken. And
they used to go to the Broadway musical
Camelot,
yeah.
Right? Yeah. And then there's also the whole thing of JFK's mom, I think, talked about how she gave him a copy of a King Arthur book, and he was really raised with this idea of leading, I guess, and leading for something greater than yourself. But yeah, I was just looking at the quote, sorry, that she said that Jackie Kennedy said, "At night before we'd go to sleep, Jack liked to play some records, and the song he loved most came at the very end of this record. The lines he loved to hear were, "Don't let it be forgot, that once there was a spot for one brief shining moment that was known as Camelot." She wanted to make sure that the point came clear and went on, "There'll be great presidents again, and the Johnsons are wonderful. They've been wonderful to me, but there'll never be another Camelot again." And this is being recounted by T.H. White,
Oh, and he's the author of
who
the
wrote A Once and Future King and that whole book series.
Ill-Made Knight and Knights of the Round Table, I think is the other one.
And the one that you have is the
Ill-Made Knight. Yeah, that's about Lancelot and
right.
Guinevere. Yeah.
And then, you know, what's interesting is that I had pulled this up, that one of the quotes, sorry, I don't know where it's going to be.
Oh, Adolf Hitler, Amish.
There's the Amish.
The Amish showing up for Trump.
Might does not make right, right makes right. So you've heard RFK Jr. use that quote a lot, because also he was raised with this book as well. And I think one of the things with Arthur in this is that he had a falcon or a hawk, and you know how RFK Jr. is really big into falconry as well. And so it's coming back, right?
It is, and that's also something that was used in Camelot in those times, right? Like sending out a falcon and so forth. It's very Merlin times. Mm-hmm. So it's like, you know, it is interesting because he does say that, and that is a tip off to Camelot, because it is the author that wrote the modern version of the story. Mm-hmm. Because the other versions are depicted through so many different parts of history over like the last 800, 900 years. And really, actually, Romanticism before Shakespeare is really through Camelot and the story of Lancelot and Guinevere, the first 50 Shades of Grey of our time.
Was Lancelot.
And Guinevere.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, and it's so many leaders throughout time have brought up the King Arthur analogy to try to say, I am the new King Arthur. And
it's funny that King Arthur doesn't get the love.
No.
He has the might.
But right makes might.
But it's also like Merlin's test of everybody, right? Like Lancelot and Guinevere, can you be? I did it in my whole Hypergate school. Like, what if because when Lancelot has to save Guinevere, right?
Like we need to see that.
Because she's burning, because she had a twin sister, and Arthur went crazy and went, oh my God, she switched on me. And he's about to burn his own wife when it's really her twin sister, right? Then Lancelot goes and if you do Lancelot saves Guinevere. Go to the images. And you'll see her.
Is it here?
Well, you can see that one that's on the second column, third in. Like he's grabbing her and taking her away. That's one, right? That's like him taking her away. And those are see the flames? Mm-hmm. Arthur was going to burn Guinevere as a witch. So then if you go back again to that Google thing, I could see it. Somebody put writing over it. If we scroll down some more, you'll see. Okay, go actually to that one right there. It's that big one to the right.
This one?
Yeah, that. So after Arthur goes, I'm gonna kill fucking Gwen. She fucking changed on me. Lancelot saves her, and then Lancelot and Guinevere go to Lancelot's castle. And then Arthur's like, I'm going to send a fucking army after you, motherfucker. Right? And he's like, dude, you're fucking gone crazy. This is your wife. I just saved your wife. You almost burned your wife. Lancelot brings Guinevere back to Arthur. And this is the moment that they fall in love when they went when she got rescued. Mm. And so she never enjoyed Arthur ever again after this moment right here. Hence, this was my past life. But Like this was, and so I showed that this is the COVID moment here. I remember I put the masks on the horses and shit.
Yes, I forgot about that.
And I said, this is where a lot of people have this thing of like, why would you go back to the thing that was so horrible? Mm-hmm. Right?
Because it's your duty, right? I mean,
exactly, because they didn't believe that they could go anywhere else. The only place to go was Camelot. But Merlin did so many tests. Because the test also was, are you two going to, like they had the option to just be like, hey, he's fucked up. I know we were friends. I know I'm the Knight of the Round Table, but we're going to go do our own thing. Right? That's Lancelot of Fond du Lac. He was a prince and his parents were kings in France and queen in France. They could have gone back there. But they don't, and then they choose to cheat for the whole 20 plus years, right? And she never loves Arthur. So the whole story of Arthur is never about love. It's about him trying to kill Guinevere.
But why was he trying to kill her?
Because he thought that she was a witch from her twin sister because he actually had mental problems. Right? So then you have the test of him. It's because of Excalibur. He's so focused that he has Excalibur that he's the special one. So it's the sword, the idea that I have might, I have this power, and the obsession with that power that you're not even willing to pay attention to your love story, that you actually are more afraid of losing your power because you think that your wife has turned into a witch because there was all the magic and stuff going down, but he didn't understand it all. And then you have the test of Lancelot, and Lancelot goes for the Holy Grail, and the angels don't allow him to pass because of what he did by cheating on, being a bad friend to Arthur, but also because of Guinevere cheating. So it's his son, Galahad, who's the one who finds the Holy Grail.
So the stories are all about, do you have what it takes to be a courageous and noble person and to do what's right even if it's not easy? And it's the story of how power can affect someone who's supposedly ordained to rule, right?
Yeah, and the reason why that Lancelot's the Black Knight is because he was the most feared. He was the best knight of them all, and he was the most fierce. Mm-hmm. But he also was called the ill-made knight because he always thought he's very Chiron-y. Like, he was the strongest, but he also was beat up so bad, so he felt like he looked a little bit different. Like, he wasn't, like, proper looking. But Guinevere was into the hardcore masculine, right? And he was kind of the ladies' man of everybody nobody wants the King Arthur guy who's losing, who's fat and like, has a sword. Like,
but he was trying to burn her as a witch. So of course you're going to go off with
right. But then that other weird part of the story is Lancelot. Then Elaine is this woman who's obsessed with Lancelot. She uses a spell to look like Guinevere, sleeps with Lancelot. He wakes up. It's not her. She's the one who eventually actually does have Galahad, his kid, and Guinevere is like, I don't want to see you, Lancelot. And then of course it's I don't want to see you. Okay, I guess I'll see. I guess it was just a spell. That's what the Ill-made Knight goes deeper into. But yeah, anyway, it's an interesting thing that if you think of Trump, you think of RFK. There is this kind of interesting Camelot moment of Trump kind of bringing the round table together, right? But I would say that the weird part of all this story might be where is J.D. Vance the Lancelot and Trump the
Melania?
That was what, it's weird is if you look at the video from last night, I thought of this in the back of my head. When Trump did his speech, they showed a picture of Vance and Melania.
I saw that picture.
Right? And there's been that weird thing of like, we obviously know Trump ain't banging Melania. Right? No, I mean, the way that they even kissed is very like, they don't, Like, and like that's where there are weird things in J.D. Vance's chart, like his Venus square Saturn, that's not that tight, but his Sun square Saturn is... He's got some interesting, he's got Venus sextile Pluto, Venus trine Neptune. He's in a Pluto square Pluto, Neptune square Neptune transit. But I think it's more like, is Camelot going to go the right way? Mm-hmm. Because maybe there might be the feeling of a past life for him with Melania or something, but it's like, we're not doing that this life. RFK is the Merlin, I would say.
That's interesting.
Right? The council of it all and understanding of it all. Plus RFK used to be a Catholic, right? Now he meditates, spiritual, right? He did do all the drugs and he's not doing drugs anymore. So he's been through the Merlin experience to get to the other side of the 21 lessons of Merlin. But they all haven't.
Yeah. Well, you also said that he is like the Benjamin Franklin.
Correct. And Benjamin Franklin did the same thing.
Yeah.
Ladies, alcohol, has the good ideas, humble though, not making it about him, but also knows the stories, knows the ways. Like we're all, let's be real, J.D. Vance, Trump, and you can say the same for Tim Walz or Kamala Harris or even Biden. They don't know any of this shit either. They don't know what they don't. They don't know. They don't know these stories. They don't know the esoteric parts. They don't know the spiritual parts. They don't know.
Yeah, but you have to have one of each type for the round table, right? And you have to have the Merlin.
Right.
But what I think is interesting is...
It's really, who's the Mordred?
Yeah, who is that?
Which is really, who also wants Guinevere and does take Guinevere, but also is relative to King Arthur.
Didn't you showed...
So if you look up Mordred, it's ID, but it doesn't matter. It'll pop up. Oh. Or it's ED, you're right. Okay, yeah. Mordred, Wikipedia right there to the very left. Right. So Mordred's the one that comes in when they're all in their most worst space. Arthur's in heartbreak because he realized his wife never wanted to be with him, and his best friend and his top knight, they were having an affair. But he knew about it the whole time. He finally accepted it, was heartbroken, and that's when Lancelot leaves, and they were about to start this huge war. And then what happens is Mordred comes in to take over, and Lancelot comes back, but not in time enough to save Arthur, right? So the whole end of Arthur and all of Camelot is Mordred. When the whole spiritual part of Camelot goes south, which actually happened to JFK Jr., because JFK cheated on Jackie, Marilyn Monroe, all those kind of things. So he's kind of like, JFK's kind of playing the Lancelot role, right? JFK was more obsessed with the Lancelot role than he was King Arthur's role. And it's probably RFK's father who was more like the Arthur role.
I always think of Arthur from The Sword and the Stone, or is that
no? That's Disney's Disney's version to try and teach young children. Well, and because Disney, he's a Mason, so forth, and Masons and stuff are into the older occult stories. And really, if you want to be honest, the truth, like even Shakespeare, and that's a whole nother story. But all of that's taken, or even in Dante's work, right, with Beatrice, it's all about. That's where you actually see in that, beginning of the 14th century. That's a long time ago, when Dante's writing that work. He's talking about Lancelot and Guinevere. Being used as an example of him with Beatrice to be like, no, I'm not gonna go too far here because I like another girl and da 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 da. Mm-hmm. Like, that's 800 years ago.
Yeah.
With Jupiter, Saturn, that was 800 years ago under the same.
Right, that is the same transit, isn't it?
Correct. So
when Dante used it.
And then you have the Pluto Capricorn transit where we've been talking about King Henry VIII, but Henry VIII wasn't supposed to be the king. It was his brother Arthur, who died young, who was married to Catherine.
And his brother was named Arthur because
of this story.
They were trying to bring back Camelot.
They were trying to bring back Camelot. Yeah. So Pluto Capricorn is always trying to bring back Camelot. And this is where that the Jupiter Saturn of 1960, we saw this in 2020 in Capricorn. I'm just pointing there, right? That's in the end of 1960. So this is as the JFK's won the election, right? But if you look at when the aspect here, I'm going to have to put the transiting, when you do that Jupiter conjunct Saturn, it's in 1961, February 18th, right after the inauguration, and it's in Capricorn at 25 degrees. Oh, let me put it here. Right, so it meets at 25 degrees, and then if you were to do the next one, right, it meets in 1980, right? So that's why they always say the cursed Tippecanoe every 20-year cycle with presidents, right? So Biden's under the spell of a destruction, which kind of is Kamala, but also from now until January 20th, I think it's pretty much written in the stars that he will not stay president and something will happen whether he steps down or not, and Kamala will become president in the middle of the worst Chiron transit of her life, the loser who is leading the country down the worst path of all time, and the whole country wanting to push Trump in, and Trump is stuck with Mars retrograde in his 12th, like, can't do shit. Or J.D. Vance can't do shit. But the bringing of Camelot back, if we come to the 2021, so you can see how they try to bring it in because in 1963, JFK is assassinated. And if I go back real quick to stay there for a second, the 61 one, JFK is assassinated, and you know, it all just like falls apart, right? So there was this kind of trying to bring it up, but it just doesn't happen. It falls apart. And anybody who's tried to bring it back up, it usually falls apart. Maybe there is this 0 degree Aquarian one that allows this story to move past its own curse. Let's call it the Camelot curse. Right? The curse of, can Camelot actually be fulfilled? So here's the Jupiter-Saturn right there, 0 degree, December 21st, 2020. And that's weird because it's still really not defined at that moment who's president-elect, all that shit. They tried to throw Joe Biden in, but there were still people, right? The press just in him on his own just called it. Remember that? He just showed up with a president-elect. I'm President-elect Biden now. And so he's not trying to do it. But what's weird is the 3 years into the 4 years after, right? Here we are at the election, 4 years. But if you think about RFK 3 years ago coming up, him and Trump talking, the build-up, now they've won 4 years later, and they beat the assassination that was what JFK had. Now they're unified, and now there's this whole like Pluto Capricorn thing that's bringing it all in with the revolution to the Henry VIII. In many ways, maybe he was trying to fulfill his brother's shoes too. Yeah. By all the wives that he had a Lancelot obsession. And that's where you can also play that with Trump or RFK, right? With their whole issues with women in the past or whatever. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of like part of the whole Camelot thing, part and parcel. Yeah. No, and if that's a bad thing or not, I don't know. I mean, that's the whole thing about society today is it's kind of become very weird about people's pasts. It's more about what you're doing now.
And that's so much what the stories of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table are about. It's in the moment, are you going to rise up and do the right thing? Yeah. And it's how do you get there, right? It's the story of all of the wrong things people do as they're figuring out what's the right thing to do, because that's life, right? But the other thing I'm wondering is... and
so what's squaring now? Jupiter, Saturn.
I was going to ask you, when did it square after JFK was assassinated? What year was that?
So going back to that, let's do square. It happened in 65, July 6th. How ironic. And that was also a very extreme time. But look at that, Jupiter in Gemini. That was a North Node in Gemini too. Wow. And that was Jupiter, that was Saturn in Pisces and Jupiter in Gemini. Now we're flipped, or the same. We're the same. Because it's the same Jupiter-Saturn cycle, just it happened in Capricorn at 25 degrees. This one happened at 0 Aquarius, right? So it's going to be you're going to see, you can track Jupiter Saturn cycles, you can track Venus cycles. Those are the best to track as far as timing 20-year, 8-year cycles, you know?
Some of the things that happened that date, the 25th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, the Senate approved it. Wasn't ratified yet. South Platte River flood. I think we've looked at this.
But that's what's going to come up.
Yeah. I know.
That's why I brought that up in my election thing with the Jupiter Saturn square in the same signs. I brought that up.
Yeah, it's
the exact day.
Right here. Or no.
That week.
Did we look at this? Is that when was oh no, never mind. The Cuban Missile Crisis. Why did we look at that? Because it was
Oh, that was another thing we were looking at.
I don't remember what was this transit. Continental Airlines.
Oh, because it had just happened, right? Like the Russian submarines had just come into Cuba.
Okay, that's why we were looking at it. So where's the July?
So that
6th?
happened. So that's what's weird is like if you really follow Jupiter Saturn transit cycles, you're gonna see repeats, just how you see a Uranus in the same position of World War II and Hitler. You're gonna feel that, but you're gonna have to relook at it because who was in power? That's the thing is when Hitler was in power is when he did his crazy stuff too. But also Trump was never jailed for a long time, and Trump didn't write a book while he was in jail. Trump wrote a book before he was in politics, and not about anything, but he was about just making deals. So it's like a whole different thing. It's like
this is interesting because it says Martin Luther King Jr. delivered the American Dream, right? So the "I Have a Dream" speech. What's interesting is that someone had pointed out that the inauguration is going to happen on MLK Jr. Day, whatever, Martin Luther King Day. So it's interesting. But let's look at the 6th.
Oh, there's the Senate. Yeah, voted 68-8 to approve the proposed 25th Amendment to the United States, clearing the way for the change in the presidential succession to be sent to the states for ratification, which is what the whole Trump thing was about. It's also Chiron Aries time too, or Pisces. Actually, that's Pisces. We've already been through that, but
wow. And the Council of Ministers of the Soviet Union approved sending 2,500 Soviet Army instructors to North Vietnam. So yeah, but
we're in that Camelot transit, and we're in that moment where it does feel like you're getting a Joe Rogan, you're getting even Dana White. That was interesting during Trump's, I mean, president-elect moment of like taking the win. He gave the mic and the platform to the vice president. He gave it to his like chief of staff of the campaign who didn't want to be seen, and then had another guy talking, she's the best, nobody knew, no names said, and then, oh, Dana White, get up here. Like, and he was the guy who brought him in for the RNC. I think it's really interesting though that it's like all these people from all these different places, it's like not some, part and parcel Dick Cheney, Liz Cheney Republican thing, right? It's not really Republican. And even like they say that about a Kennedy Democrat. They say that because he's not a Democrat associated with Southern Democrats, even though JFK did vote against the first civil rights that were in the 50s. He voted against it as a senator. Yeah. So the Kennedy switch was kind of like the Abraham Lincoln like kind of idea of like, I'm going to be a different Democrat than these Democrats. But he was dealing with a lot of health problems too. That was the thing about JFK. He had, what I forgot what that's called. It's called, he had to take steroids all the time because he had a really bad autoimmune disorder. And
he had back issues
and then,
as well.
Yeah, and then he was hyperthymic temperament, so he was on barbiturates and he was injecting amphetamine every day and taking amphetamine pills. Mm-hmm. They're on all the White House recordings too. Hey, give me one of those blue pills. Yeah. And let me go see Marilyn Monroe.
Yeah. what was I? Oh, I was just going to say as well that Jackie and JFK lost a child as well who was born while they were in the White House, and they lost him, Patrick, in 1963 also. Let's talk about a bad year.
Yeah, I mean that's what's difficult about Jupiter, Saturn presidents, right? Especially this cycle. That's where the Biden thing makes a lot of weirdness to it. Because, like, you know, we're about to see what that cycle really brought. It was actually like either Trump has an amazing astrologer, or he's just going with the randomness of luck and Uranian North Node conjunction eclipse, that he just literally is just at the right place at the right time. Because, like, literally, like, if he would have won, would have been the worst thing for him. Even though he did win and they stole it, it was the best karma for him to ever take and accept. And the fact that he did accept it with no states wanting to hear it because they used the COVID emergency, being like, well, the state legislatures can shift things. And that's what's weird about the 25th Amendment, right? Is all that's going to be coming back up with this Jupiter-Saturn squares. You mean to tell me that 2020 was stolen because they used the COVID emergency to be like, well, in a state of emergency federally, and now it's a federal election, that we're just not going to get involved with the state stuff because there was a federal emergency, and we also saw that the state had declared an emergency. Each state all 50 states, right? So that they can do different things under emergencies, like the governor and the secretary of state can do things to the legislature that the legislature electorally wise normally needs to be the senators in the house of the actual state with the electors and making the voting laws, whereas that was all overlooked. And so no case took standing because of COVID emergency, which the media doesn't say.
Right.
So that's where this gets really interesting territory of why they shifted the 25th Amendment after Trump gets out of office to where it's just a ceremonial role now of the vice president to count those electoral votes from each state of the certifications. But what's interesting now is she's actually so Chiron and Pisces with all these crazy transits coming. And is it going to be her, or are they going to have to put somebody else? Because I feel like I think a lot of the astrologers who predicted Kamala, they just weren't smart enough to be like, well, she'll be there for a second. She's got South Node in the 7th house. Like, and that's what the Democrats do, right? Like, oh, Joe Biden, you were the VP. We're going to let you. Hillary, I know Bernie Sanders is the one everybody wants. We'll kick him out so you can try. Right? That's what they do. So guess what? They're going to be the ones who say they're the first woman president for a month, 2 months.
I think that's what all party politics have done, though. Right?
No, not the Republicans.
No?
No, it's bloodthirsty Republican. After the Bush years and all that, it's blood. Like Trump had to go against 20 people. Right? And they were all trying to get Jeb Bush in there, and didn't happen.
Well, yeah.
You know? Or even Reagan, he was a Democrat, and again, they didn't know if they really wanted to take him in the party and all that stuff, right? But the 70s were so bad, and Jimmy Carter was so bad in those years that they, all right, let's go with this, see what happens. Reagan was a Democrat prior, right? But he was a movie star. And then he switched to Republican. He was a governor of California, and people liked him. So they were like, okay, right? Eisenhower was done. Nixon had his horrible fucking years and had to leave office for Watergate, which actually was a setup by the Democrats and the FBI and the CIA plants that were put in, right? Look deep into that. Those files will get released soon. Oh, yeah. If you look into Watergate, that was totally planted by the CIA. Like, why would he even do that? Makes no sense. Like, why would you go? It's always been snooping on the DNC, right? Like, they use that. So they used that against Trump, trying to say that Julian Assange, right, and all of WikiLeaks, when they got the DNC, like, files, right, that was a big breach, and that's how they tried to use it against him. They tried to create a Watergate without calling it Watergate with Russian disinformation. And they used Watergate in those times to be like, oh, he's the RNC and he's the head and he's the president and he's the incumbent. So he's trying to spy because he doesn't want to lose his position. But he had no threat. Right? There was no threat. So when he became president, it was like, oh shit, they threw Watergate. And guess who was the beginning of that? That was where Hillary Clinton got her start, was in the Watergate. Bill Clinton, that's where they met. It goes way deep down that rabbit hole, but a lot of people aren't ready for that yet. But that's how. Even what's weirder is that there's part of this alliance is about exposing the JFK files finally that they've promised to release. So we're months away from that, in the same Jupiter cycle of when the biggest questions in 64 and 65, and especially when Martin Luther King Jr. gets shot. RFK gets shot, or a plane goes down, all that weird stuff, like all that. Like
JFK Jr.
JFK Jr.
Yeah. RFK Jr. was,
but like all
RFK
of that is about to come up, and when people get that truth, it's gonna. And even Trump said on the podcast with Joe Rogan, like, I should have done it, but I didn't want to. I didn't look. I looked half of it, and I know it, but there's people alive still. To tell the American people that their government is doing that dirty shit. That's a hard call, because you don't know now if they're going to come behind you and kill you for that too.
Right. Well,
you know what I mean?
Trump would be the one to do it then, because he has faced death. I think it's an interesting thing about leaders in history too. To me, I always think of Elizabeth I, who survived smallpox and had that feeling of, okay, now I have this, I can survive, and they become a little bit braver, or a lot braver at that point.
Right.
So I do hope that's something that gets released, and there's obviously a lot of things people have been trying to keep hidden, and that's why there's been so much orchestrating to pit people against each other and to use so many tactics that we've seen used all over the world, and to see them being used here at home. We've got to kind of, let's go to the Camelot metaphor. We've got to figure out that right is right, not might. Might doesn't make right. And that we need to step up and look for the truth in each other, look towards each other, and work against obvious things that have obviously been hidden. I really do hope people can break out of the spell totally.
Well, what's really interesting is that when JFK ran against Nixon in 60, they were friends in the Senate, right? So they were actually like cordial. The other thing is Eisenhower just previously had exposed the military-industrial complex.
Right.
So the whole Camelot thing, Nixon stayed friends with JFK after. They weren't enemies. They didn't stay enemies. They stayed friendly. And then Eisenhower had warned about it, and so JFK actually took it seriously and went against it. It's really weird, though, because something must have been done to Nixon in 68 because of Johnson and whoever Johnson was connected to. And that's where you get the deep state, is Johnson, right? Like, he's smiling as he's taking the oath on Air Force One now with his wife after JFK just got shot, right? And then, right, Bay of Pigs and all the things that happened to really start a false war in Vietnam, and then Nixon having to push it for some reason because there's obviously something. And then obviously Nixon trying to end all that and all the weird shit that happens at college campuses with all that Nixon's dealing with this horrible situation. And then why would he want to spy on the Democrats? They are trying to throw him under the bus because they don't want him to expose what Johnson's the one who started Vietnam, the beginnings of it. He was the one who was going against, right, JFK, and then the advice to JFK was, during the whole Cuban Missile Crisis, was to go bomb the Russians in Cuba. And he said no. And that's where you get thank God he had his family, and that's what I love the movie JFK, because it's like when Kevin Costner is the one who has to go and like call up the military guys there and be like, I don't give a fuck what you do. You do not shoot any fucking thing down there when you're doing your surveillance pictures and stuff. Yeah. That's all true story. when you look at the whole thing here, that's what makes this all convoluted at this moment. It's how much it's all connected to the 60-year cycle. And really that's kind of the shift point of military industrial complex coming into Camelot, trying it, failing. They didn't have the safeguards enough. Plus, I mean, not to talk shit on JFK, but you know, he played the Lancelot card while he was on amphetamine all day. I mean, you know, there was a pool at the White House. It's gone now because of JFK and his family and bringing all the White House aides to the pool. And then Jackie would have to go to your first lady thing. Right? So it's going to be interesting because, you know, I think that's the deepest challenge for Trump and RFK together is they both have that same issue.
I was just thinking of something that kind of connects to Grover Cleveland. That
let's end that with like connecting this to the last time a president that was a president and then came back to be a president for a second term. The only time was Grover Cleveland, who was a Democrat and was opposite of Trump. Was not about tariffs, was a Democrat. Really weird.
Right. And I was just thinking, would he have been elected? Because I was thinking, okay, if we go back in time, what was the last Jupiter-Saturn cycle? It was 1900, right?
1901, Theodore Roosevelt then becomes the president after just 6 months of being vice president. Yeah.
So Grover Cleveland was until 1897. It's just really interesting how he's right before this cycle. But he was... here's his picture.
Yeah.
So people are doing stories about him because he was the last president elected for 2 non-consecutive terms. And he was also the first Democrat elected after the Civil War in 1885. Sorry, I'm trying to make it a little bit bigger for people. So one of 9 children of a Presbyterian minister, born in New Jersey in 1837. He was also unmarried. He got married in the White House. I thought was interesting. It shows how in June 1886 he married 21-year-old Frances Folsom.
How old was he? Age gap?
He was 44 in 81. Said at 44 he emerged into a political prominence that carried him to the White House in 3 years. So that was 81.
81, and he was born in 837.
Yeah, so his wife was 21
when he was
49 or 50.
37, 50 is 87, so 81 you're saying? So he was in his 40s. Yeah, they were like a 20 plus year age gap. Mm-hmm. Get it, Grover Cleveland.
But listen, he won the presidency with the combined support of Democrats and Reform Republicans, the Mugwumps, who disliked the record of his opponent James G. Blaine of Maine. He didn't like the comforts of the White House. I must go to dinner, he wrote a friend, but I wish it was to eat a pickled herring, a Swiss cheese, and a chop at Louis' instead of the French stuff I shall find. Oh, poor guy. He vigorously pursued a policy barring special favors to any economic group, vetoing a bill to appropriate $10,000 to distribute seed grain among drought-stricken farmers in Texas. So he chose instead to privilege the fact that federal aid in such cases encourages the expectation of paternal care on the part of the government and weakness.
You know where he got that from?
The sturdiness of our national character. Where?
He's a very popular figure in 19th century history. He has stories about him in the Old West, and he was part of Congress. Davy Crockett.
Oh, okay.
Davy Crockett learned the lesson when a fire happened outside Washington, D.C., and everybody started to put up a vote. Well, we need to let's appropriate some money to fix this part of D.C. There was a fire, right? So he was about to go vote for it, and he did. And then when he went to go run for re-election back in Tennessee, Davy Crockett, they were like, you motherfucker, we need help here. Why aren't you giving money for us here? If you think of every problem that happens in America, the government can't fix everything. You cannot fix everybody's problem. And so Davy Crockett wrote a whole thing about how that one vote he did for that one fire in Washington, D.C. was the worst vote, right? And that spread like wildfire in the 1800s. And he was a Southern, he was a Southerner. But that's what's interesting is that that's the same rhetoric Davy Crockett speaks about. And I don't know why I'm that guy who remembers every little stupid thing in fucking American history. But
it's so interesting because Grover Cleveland, so Grover Cleveland, here's the thing I wanted to know about him. Because he is a Democrat. And so Democrats today would say, okay, well, the Democrats have flipped and he was more like a Republican. But he actually was a very interesting type of Democrat who had some policies that we'd consider Democratic today and some that are Republican that we consider that. But he also was an anti-abolitionist, and he's elected the first Democrat elected after the Civil War because, of course, the Democrats were the Southerners, right? And so, and he was a Northern Democrat, which is interesting.
Yeah, he helps the Klans start. Ku Klux Klan start.
Yeah, I couldn't find that information as much.
Well, if you think about the timing.
Mm-hmm. But I did find out because I thought, okay, well,
it's a dog whistle. It's a dog whistle for him to be an anti-abolitionist to get voted electorally to get those southern states to finally, after a long Reconstruction, where there was like, we're not the only Democrat they had was Johnson that was brought in when Lincoln died right away. That was it.
Mm-hmm. So he would have been 24 when the Civil War started. So I was wondering, because I'm trying to figure out, did his family own slaves? Because there were a lot of Northerners who did. I couldn't find that information, and I don't think he did, because I was trying to figure out, why is he anti-abolitionist?
Yeah, it's kind of like L.A. New Yorkers who own like stock in Pfizer and Apple, who, Chinese camps too,
But he did not. So I thought, well, what side did he fight in on the Civil War? Did he fight? So I looked up that information and found out he actually paid a man to fight for him, to take his part in the North, though. So he did pay someone to be a Union soldier for him because he was wealthy enough to not have to fight. What else? So you're looking at his chart?
Well, yes.
And then it says, elected again in 1892, he faced an acute depression. He dealt directly with the Treasury crisis rather than with business failures. So there had been a depression, right? And then he's reelected. And where does it say that he also was against this Pullman railroad strike? He was against the railroad strikers. He was against tariffs, as I said. But anyway, do you want to look at his chart? Are there any similarities between that time and today?
Then, you have the Neptune and Pluto conjunction building up in Gemini, right? During that time, which we're still in. It's going to take a long time to get rid of. But chart-wise, he was a Pisces, born at the end of Pisces, with Venus, Mercury, and that Mercury-Uranus conjunction. Look at those quincunxes he has. Green. He has Neptune in Aquarius.
What's the point on the other end? What's down there?
Oh, look at all that Leo. So Mars, Jupiter conjunct with retrograde Jupiter, and then the moon in Leo. And then it's squaring Saturn in Scorpio.
But we don't know his rising?
No, we don't have his birth. And he was Pluto Aries. So think, from the Revolutionary War all the way up in those 1837, right? There's Pluto finally in Aries. It takes it takes a while. It's not like, oh yeah, we're going to the next Pluto, right? Like Pluto Aquarius is a long time. Pluto in Pisces is a long time. Pluto in Aries is the longest. So, into Taurus, it's really long too. A long time.
He's born with the Saturn-Jupiter square then, or?
So he's born with Saturn square Jupiter, correct? Right, and so is Trump. Trump's Cancer, Saturn, Jupiter, Libra.
So does that make?
And so Kamala was also a Saturn Jupiter square too, and we're in a Jupiter Saturn square.
So we may not have heard the last of her. She might come back. Or?
That's what I'm saying. She's gonna be president for a month or two after Saturn stations direct.
Yeah.
Because that activates the square again, and Jupiter's staying retrograde for the rest of the year. So, yeah, I mean, it's interesting with him though. There is, if I were to find some similarities, I mean, one, they both have Mars and Leo, him and Trump. Two, not a lot of, it's Mars and Leo, and then the fact that they have Jupiter Saturn square. I mean, there's not a lot in common. They don't have a lot of the same vibe or energy, except some of that Leo stuff. But that's what's weird, right? He didn't feel comfortable in the White House. Trump redid the White House. Right?
To make himself comfortable.
That beautiful White House. And lives Lincoln's bedroom, right? Because he's a Republican, right? Exactly. Right? Grover Cleveland probably was pissing on that play thing. Personally, I have a feeling looking at this chart that he was a deceptive guy. And then when you think of the clans and what he was the one that let the South go be the South again. Right?
Yeah, he did.
And to be honest with you, he's the Mitt Romney. He reminds me more of Mitt Romney. The last time we saw a Pisces presidential candidate was Mitt Romney. Right?
Was George Washington a Pisces?
Yes, but
so we have had a Pisces president before.
Yeah, I mean, there's been Pisces presidents, but
he's just not a good one. But I just thought of something too. I just Googled what's the age difference between Donald Trump and Melania? 24 years.
Oh, yeah, and there's so Jupiter square Saturn.
I don't remember what was his wife's
name?
name?
That was Kamala's relationships her whole life. She was with older men.
Yeah.
Willie Brown was in his 60s, and she was in her 20s. Montel was in his late mid 40s. She was in her early 20s.
Well, but she has a 7th.
I mean, but she used it to get to where she needed to go, and then found a cuck husband that could just sit on the sideline.
She found her Francis Cleveland. I just.
Well, and she was a Cancer, July 21st, 1864. Wow, she's born right as the Civil War is coming to its close. Right? She died in 1947 after World War II. That woman went through the end of the Civil War. She went through the whole reconstruction of America and the divisiveness that lasted for almost 100 years. She went through World War I. Well, she went through Theodore Roosevelt, which I think is probably one of my favorite presidents in U.S. history. We can do him another time, but he is my favorite. But she went through him. She went through the whole world changing. She saw the whole world change.
Yeah.
And she got married in the White House.
Interesting.
That's what's weird is I think Biden had one of his granddaughters or something get married at the White House recently, right? It was this last year.
I don't know. Didn't one of the Bush girls get married too? I don't
know.
Yeah,
I don't know. But yeah, it's kind of a rare thing, but but to be a president getting married at the White House.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, if you think about it, where's Frances Folsom from?
Let's get back.
Let's see what part of the country she was born in. Is she a Southerner?
Why does it say Melania?
Or is he trying to, I'm with a Northerner, so you can trust me.
She was born in Buffalo, New York.
Yep, there it is. Can't get more Union than that. Can't get more Yankee than that. Yankee Doodle Dandy.
Her father was a lawyer who had a law partnership with Grover Cleveland.
Gosh, that's very Anne Boleyn, you know?
It is.
Right?
I don't know enough about Grover Cleveland to make any other things.
Her father died in a carriage accident on July 23rd, 2 days after her birthday. She's 29-degree cancer, 1875, and she was born in 1864, so she was only 9 years old when her father died in a carriage accident. That was pretty normal those days, though. Family members dying at young age or when you're old or whatever, weird stuff like that.
Cleveland was given charge of his estate and became Folsom's unofficial guardian.
So the Democrats are the pedo. It's just another confirmation. That's why they don't want to talk about this story. Whenever we've done this, I always go to who's the wife or the husband, and let's go deeper.
Looking at the
right,
wife.
because it's a back then. I'm sure you would know. You're the historian, but what I've noticed as an astrologer is it's more interesting seeing in genealogy or in history. Why did they marry that person? It was always a showing. It was part of chivalry. Is kind of like, well, what family are you married to? Right? That was everything. Like, what family? And it kind of carried in the 80s still and 90s, but
that was
this 21st century has been like, whatever family you're from, whatever, right? But up until like the end of the 20th century, it was still like, what family are you from? What, especially in Western world, what family are you from? Where do they come from? What did they do? Who are they connected to?
And some people would say it's still that, but they just don't publicize it because
it's this hush hush now. The hush hush. That's crazy though, because he was her guardian.
Isn't that funny?
Folsom and her mother moved to live with relatives, first with Folsom's aunt in St. Paul. Okay, they eventually returned to Buffalo and lived in different boarding houses until they found a home. When Folsom was 14, she joined the church and she remained there devoted throughout her life. She attended, and that's what he was born of a Presbyterian minister, right? And that was actually more of a Southern thing, was the Southern chivalry movement was, the whole South and Southern Democrats and slave owners were extremely Christian. That was like you had to be.
She learned etiquette and manners from Helen Fairchild Smith and quickly became a prominent student at the school, taking her place at the center of its social life.
Well, she couldn't make it to his inauguration in the first term as president, right? Because it was conflicting with her final exams, but she visited him at the White House during spring break some weeks later.
What kind of spring break?
And
was
Washington,
that?
D.C. left a positive impression on her, and she accompanied the new president on nightly walks in the East Room while she stayed at the White House. Folsom was also permitted to ascend the Washington Monument before its opening, so I'm sure Grover Cleveland and her had their Medusa moment on there.
Medusa moment.
Yeah, on the temple, right? Where she met former First Lady Harriet Lane. And then she graduated in 1885. And then she spent the summer with her grandfather. And then Cleveland proposed marriage by letter, August 1885, while Folsom was visiting. Okay.
Everyone involved agreed to keep the planned wedding a secret. And the president's sister, that's what I remember. Okay, I always knew that his sister was serving as the first lady, right?
How weird is that? Is weird.
He was a different one.
That's a really hardcore Pisces. And I'm not saying all Pisces, but a purebred. Sun, Mercury, Venus, Pisces. Purebred.
Sun, Mercury.
I always call any sign a purebred if you have the Sun, Mercury, and Venus in there. Like that is a purebred Pisces. You're going to feel Pisces sun sign horoscopes more than anything or whatever. If you're a purebred, the only way I'm like, you're a pure that sign. If you're just the sun, I'm like, you're not really that sign. You're kind of it. What house is that sun rule? you're more that. If you don't have Mercury and Venus.
Okay.
That's my secret in how I do TV shows or quick readings or da-da-da. Like if I don't see a purebred, I'm like, eh.
I'm not a purebred Libra then.
No, not a lot of people are purebreds. Very
I have
rare.
Mercury and Sun, but then Venus is in Scorpio.
But look at that. It's all about secrets, secret wedding, secret this, secret that. Oh, I'm actually the guardian, but don't tell anybody that I've been her guardian forever. And since she's been 9 years old, I've been, touching her and doing this.
But look at,
You know what I mean? Like, and I've been making sure she's in school and making sure she's in the White House with me and making sure
her
that.
etiquette lessons.
Yeah.
Finished and going to Europe.
Right. Oh man, that's disgusting.
And then media attention quickly turned Folsom into a celebrity. Suddenly, she's the new wife of the president.
She's the new brat. She's call him daddy podcast. She started the first podcast at the White House.
I'm just reading about.
She was 21 years old and her groom was 49.
Mm-hmm.
That is an age gap.
They were closely followed by reporters.
That means that if it's 28 years, it means they have Saturn both in Scorpio.
So what does that mean for their life as a couple?
They're survivors and they will do whatever they need to do what needs to be done. And they are cutthroat. Don't fuck with the Saturn Scorpio.
Unless
They have to go through extreme, like her dad died when she was young, right? Like they have to like go to the shadowiest place. I mean, even my life, my Saturn Scorpio, fuck. The return is rough. Roughest of them all.
She would have had her return when they were elected to the second term?
When she was 28. So
So if she was 21 when they got married in what
how
year
long
was
did
it?
he survive? He looked like, look at that wedding drawing of him. That looks like, dude, lose some weight.
Yeah, he doesn't look like the healthiest guy.
Probably had gout.
I wonder if that was his sister right there.
Probably confused like Joe Biden, his sister and his wife. Like, what the hell?
Oh, no.
Just being real. I mean, that actually happened.
Who's that?
That's the beginning of trans.
I thought maybe that's the new guy after. Okay, when did he die? Let's see, second term.
Oh,
They
yeah, the
had
Panic of
2
1893.
Widowhood. After leaving the White House for the second time, the Clevelands bought Westland, a house
In New Jersey,
Princeton,
they
New
went back up
Jersey.
to be Yankees.
Their first-born daughter died.
You would have done that, though, if you were president and you would have want to carry a social. There was no social political world unless you were dealing with clans and you were dealing with the ideas of bringing back the South in the South. There was no. That's what's really weird is like, even if you like go into the segregation acts of the southern states when they started popping up in the, it was like, that was the beginning of like, oh, but if you notice, the South is still not a place for politics. They have to come up to the North. That's how they set Reconstruction up in a really weird way, because never again will there be a Virginia White House. Or,
Right.
after Jefferson Davis and all that, they never. And actually, that was Washington's big debate about Washington being where it is. He didn't want it too far south there. So that if you're in politics, you have to be a Yankee always.
Yeah. I always thought that was funny how, Bill Clinton's from Arkansas, and to me that's not South. You know what I mean?
But he was deeply involved in Southern politics for state, right? And that's what made him a outsider candidate
But then,
And he was at a perfect time when it was Reagan for 8 years, it was Bush, and then Ross Perot is the golden thing that happened to Clinton because he got to debate both. And he got to take that stance of the younger one because everybody wanted Ross Perot, but it was like he's old and he kind of is not that socially well. And Bill Clinton actually was really on his feet, and it was really, that's one of the best debates to watch is the unique extra debates they did, and when they put all three of them in town hall style. And then they were like, this is the most divisive ads I'm seeing on TV. So people think now is divisive. It was divisive in 92. And the way that Bush handled it was so whatever. It's kind of, you know, they're the ones doing it on me, so I'm doing it back. And Bill Clinton's like, you're right. But that's kind of the way it really works. And I'm going to call this guy out when he's doing the stuff that he's been doing. Right? And then that's when Ross Perot said, I'm not part of it. I'm putting my money just to make sure that you guys get money. And then we all make money. Right? So it was like Bill Clinton's the one who won that debate from the way that went. I mean, it's really an interesting Southern. And if you look at it in history, it's Bill Clinton's kind of the South's Democrat coming back, the big Southern Democrat coming back after a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I don't know whether Texas, also then George W. Bush claims Texas as his home.
Correct.
Even though his dad is one of the most blue blood Northern Yankee types, and his mom.
Right.
Right, but he was Texan.
They did that, and then they installed W to be the governor of Texas, and then he was owner of Texas Rangers.
Oh, okay. I was trying to think what the name of the.
So it was about money, and then they built the farm, their land out there, and then America Republican turned into Marlboro cigarette cowboy. Right? Chevrolet trucks like a rock, all during the Reagan years because Reagan wore a cowboy hat. Reagan turned the Republican Party into farmers, trucks, America, the heartland, the car, the biggest automobile industry was the 80s, all made in America, Chevy, GM, Ford, Dodge. Every commercial, the most commercials cars ever ran was during the 80s. And because Reagan played a great cowboy, he wore the cowboy, brought that into the Republican Party and the Marlboro Man style of that. And the Bushes, because they were part of the Reagan administration, moved a bunch of their stuff into Texas to build that. And they used that to have George W. win.
So what's the new style Republican?
The new
Cleveland's from New York.
The new style Republican is the loud, rebellious, fuck you and your woke shit. Mm. And it doesn't have a look. It has I'm being me. I'm not trying to look like wearing the glass. Now it's the Democrats wear the black glasses, short hair, right? And look like I was just got out of CVS. I got my shot. Mm-hmm. That's the look.
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to...
Or a nose ring and, mm-hmm. You know, don't you dare say my wrong pronoun.
That's the etiquette of...
That's the etiquette now, yeah.
Of this
Whereas with a Trump person or a MAGA, it's like, are you cool just to talk to? I can just like be myself. Like, yeah, you can just be who you are and say what you want and you can cuss and...
When you see people who've filmed entire crowds at these different gatherings, whether it was that RFK Jr. and what was the thing in Washington, D.C.? There was a big rally that was all about unifying all these different groups of people.
Yeah.
And then if you looked outside, for example, Madison Square Garden, with all the people who were waiting to go into the Trump rally,
especially in New York City where, you know, it's kind of a melting pot there, but
yeah, the melting pot was out in force, but you'd never see that. I just was watching some videos where people were going along and looking at, and interviewing people who were there. And they weren't just selectively picking out, well, let's just get the different people. It was a sea of people who look Like you'd never see them in the same place, you know?
Well, and if you look at the Kamala rally last night that didn't happen, everybody looks pretty similar. There's a video of all the people crying last night, and it was like.
But they did decide to go to Howard University, so it's going to be skewed towards a lot of.
But even if you look at the other ones, it's very that liberal look. There's not a lot of patriotism either. Like not like like Trump, MAGA. Like you have a American flag on your car, your truck. You drive a truck. You have a truck. You know somebody with a truck. You know somebody who is a plumber or works with their hands, has tools. Liberals don't have tools, most of them. I would say Democrats have tools and provide that life, but Democrats just voted for Republicans, not liberals. The new Democrat Party is college educated, white. That's what's crazy. They make over $100,000 a year. So that's the data. It's really weird.
It is. It's very similar to Grover Cleveland.
And then children that are still living off their parents, but they're in college or they're out of college and they haven't found their job yet, but they still have a credit card from mommy.
It's kind of like Frances, what's her name?
And they're playing with whether or not they're gay or not, or lesbian
Frances
or not, or
Preston
whatever.
Going off to Europe at the end of her, after she goes to college. She actually has a wealthy sponsor, right?
Right.
Who has adopted her and made sure she was properly educated in all of the right attitudes and etiquette and sees the world. But that's very much of that time. The Gilded Age was all about learning everything you're supposed to learn and looking the part too, right? So it's a lot of people have said, or I've actually seen a few people on mainstream media talking about how one of the issues for the Democratic Party was just how out of touch they were with mainstream, with just ordinary Americans.
Yeah, they had
and how elitist the core of the party became.
Yeah, and that they actually just made the assumption, which you never should do in life, that these traditional ideologies and the different groups of people and races are going to just vote Democrat because they will. So they just put it on the hunch. They didn't actually go out to those places. Trump, when he does his rallies, he goes in the middle of Butler, Pennsylvania, right? Like what? Like way out in the middle of, most people don't know Pennsylvania is empty except on the coast. Like it's empty.
But do you remember he also went to Queens, was it? Or
Bronx. He went to the Bronx, right? Like he went everywhere, and he always has. And he also does 4 rallies in a day where she does 1. He did that with Joe Biden, and he did that against Hillary, too. The Democrats do the lazy thing. Like, we've already got it in the bag. Let's use the media to say and prop this. Because all that matters is the propping up and a little clip here and there. But that's what lost them the election.
That, and I mean, also, not going on, you're invited to go on Joe Rogan and you don't go, right? And you're afraid to just be who you are. It's sort of being really out of touch with where most Americans are. And
yeah, because both sides listen to Joe Rogan.
Right, and then you're like, well, those people are not college educated. Or it's just like, well, guess what? Those people are going to be voting for you.
Well, and they're dumb because whether it was Peter Hotez, right, talking about vaccines, very advocate for them, or, astrophysicists on there. I mean, there's a lot of liberal people that go on Joe Rogan. It's a fair and balanced place. It's not like it's all a Republican channel.
Well, wasn't he?
And he's not a Republican. Yeah, he's always a Democrat. So, and he was for RFK as a Democrat. It wasn't like it's not a Republican channel. That's why he always never did get Donald Trump on until RFK switched, and then he started seeing, and then it kind of got overwhelming where it's like, okay, like, I want to see none of the news networks are really interviewing a person truly. So he offered it to both. She didn't take it. Well, I want to show you this last kind of weird thing I found about Grover Cleveland.
Okay.
He's the first president in all these. See, these are all the lists of the Freemason presidents, right? You have Washington, you have Monroe. So there's a big gap right there. Then you have Jackson, Polk, right? Buchanan, which is the one who's installed right before the Civil War, right? Johnson, who of course takes over right after Lincoln is killed. Garfield, right? And then McKinney, right? So what's interesting is in between Garfield and McKinney is Grover Cleveland, who's not a Mason. So what's kind of interesting is he probably didn't do as much to the South as what was wanted. That's why he probably didn't win that second term, and then the third term he did, because remember, the South was heavy in Freemasonry. Heavy.
Well, that anti-Masonic party, that's what I was looking at. The anti-Masonic party was founded in 1828 in upstate New York. So that's where he was from. But also, I mean, he was reelected too after there had been a really bad financial crisis.
Right.
So it's interesting that the anti-Masons party, though, were all about how the Freemasons were an elitist group. But I really feel that you can't get...
Well, what's funny is they blur between all parties. It's not like,
No,
right?
yeah,
like,
it's
you
that
know.
brotherhood. That, That's the thing that people worry about, that it's the secret brotherhood and you can't see who is aligned where. Like which people are actually secretly meeting in this organization at nighttime. If you go up or go to the bottom, who are the most recent ones? The most
is Gerald Ford. That's where they stop reporting. Look at that. Ronald Reagan was made an honorary Freemason, and as a youth, Bill Clinton was a member of the Masonic group of the Order of de Malloy. Thomas Jefferson is frequently yet falsely linked to Freemasons. Right? They stop reporting after Ford. But Johnson, Truman, FDR, the longest running president of all of our lives. Harding, Taft, well, he's my family. Roosevelt, McKinney, and that's what's interesting is McKinney's death right at the beginning of his second term and Roosevelt taking over, and that's a Jupiter-Saturn.
Oh, so that would have been the election where Grover Cleveland could have been elected again. I mean, because this was before term limits.
Right, yeah.
But he chose not to. So
and that McKinney ticket was strong, and he got reelected again. Then Roosevelt took right over, and then he got elected for a second term, even though his first term was technically, given to him. But still, that's why I like Theodore Roosevelt's story. It's really interesting. He's the only one, besides some of the older presidents. He's like the more modern president that actually rode on a horse. He was a rough rider. He actually knew how to shoot a gun and kill somebody.
Yeah.
Right? Like all these other guys are not.
But look at how intense McKinley was. He looks intense.
I know. He died 6 months into the presidency of the second term. I think of a heart attack.
Oh, I thought he's not the one that was shot. No, that was
no. I think he died of a heart attack.
No, he was assassinated September 14th.
Oh yeah, okay. He was assassinated then.
After leading the nation to victory in the Spanish-American War, which was another thing I was thinking about, the yellow journalism of that period of time, when it was another time in American history where the media was really...
Look at this. This is when Chief Justice Fuller swears in McKinney as president, outgoing President Grover Cleveland at right.
Man, Grover does not look happy. Or maybe he was
No, he's just like, can we go? I got my 21-year-old. She's at the Washington Monument waiting for me.
She must have been in her Saturn return by then.
Oh, yeah. So, here's that 1900 election. That's coming into the new century, too. That's what was the interesting part. It was the Republican ticket.
The American flag was not planted in foreign soil to acquire more territory, but for humanity's sake.
Look, the Republican Party was gone Republican. And the new Industrial Revolution and farming, right? savings after the Panic of 1893, like the runs to the banks, America rule, the American flag has not been planted to acquire more territory, but for human sake.
What is that? Spanish rule?
Spanish rule in Cuba.
Oh my gosh, look what the Spanish were doing.
Rule in the banks, and here's the gone Democrats showing the world how it is today with Democrats. The run to the banks, which happened just in this Biden administration, and the Spanish rule in Cuba, all the immigration problems and all that shit.
Interesting.
It doesn't stop. I love that kind of history. I just was going to the assassination. Oh, okay, yeah. Entering the Temple of Music. That looks like a Masonic building, right there.
Oh, look how happy
The
he
Masonic.
was to be going in. Little did he know. I think the guy had a gunfire hidden in his newspaper. And it was
Leon,
an anarchist.
yeah, Polish American labor and anarchist.
If we believe that's really who did it.
The Temple of Music was a concert hall and auditorium built for the Pan American Exposition in New. Oh, so that's.
It's like a World's Fair.
Yeah, so. Well, he was a Mason. The Masons probably did set that up. That's interesting. I think that's where Grover Cleveland is. And personally, the history says Trump's doing the same thing, but I don't think it's even close to even like the same. There was a historian on last night, and I forgot which network I was watching, but it was they were saying this is the biggest comeback of all time. The Grover Cleveland thing wasn't a big comeback. It was kind of just like, okay, it's happening, and it wasn't a bit. It wasn't like the whole country spoke in the volume it is right now.
He wasn't gathering his team.
Yeah, it wasn't.
And all that. Mm-hmm.
Just wasn't. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm trying to get this thing here. Yeah, that was Camelot.
Camelot plus Cleveland.
Well, I think that Camelot has a lot of drama that teaches spiritually, and I think that it strives us to have higher hopes, I think, than ever. I think it's over the last 1,000 years, the story that is the closest to like this idea of Atlantis or something that's been carried throughout the time. But it really is the story that needs to finally have its positive completion and finish with it's never been ended, the Camelot story. So that's what's interesting is unless you were living in it in a past life, you have to actually go in your past life, and then you realize and you put the picture together of what was actually happening, because it's kind of fuzzy until you go in your past life regression. It's like, oh, that's where I learned astrology. Merlin for 20, 30 years put in a hut because he was like, hey, you've been a good knight, Lancelot, but it's time to learn how to use this work, right? And it's like, oh. That's not written about, but when I went in that, I was just like, oh my God. It's like everybody leaves like this, like Jackie Kennedy left, like, Guinevere's like, I'm going to go be a nun. I remember being like, what are you doing? Good luck.
It kind of reminds me of Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, who split the Spanish Empire and Holy Roman Empire, and went off to become a monk.
Right.
To live in a monastery. I don't know if he became a monk, but it's often something that people do after they have these lives where they do transformative things, whether they're good or bad.
Right.
But a lot of times these lives, and to me it's always amazing back in the 16th century, for example, when you have these monarchs that could still live such long lives for then, and then to decide, hey, I'm giving this up. Henry VIII would have never done that. Like, he was struggling until his last leg, literally. But some of them give it up and just try to recover some sort of spiritual sense of connectedness, I guess, and to try to find some sort of meaning for everything. So
to finish the Camelot history and to try and figure out the Mordred, right?
That's
that there's multiple versions of where this can go, but the best of it is that, you know, in all the original stories, right, that Mordred was depicted as Arthur's traitorous nephew and a legitimate son of King Lot. But in a popular telling, the one I remember from the French chivalric romances of the 12th century or 13th century, so in the 1200s, and made prominent today, Mordred is a power-hungry son of Arthur from the incest with Morges, prophesied by Merlin and destined to bring Britain to ruin. He survives Arthur's attempt to get rid of him soon after his birth, and years later joins his half-brothers Gawain and some of the other knights on the Round Table in Arthur's fellowship of the Round Table as a young and immortal knight. Eventually, Mordred learns of his true parentage and becomes the main actor in Arthur's downfall as he helps Agravain to expose the illicit love affair between Guinevere and Lancelot, and then takes advantage of the resulting civil war to make himself the High King of Britain, ultimately leading to both his own and Arthur's deaths in their battle. Today he remains an iconic character. Now, what's crazy about with the Trump thing right now is like we are in the Benedict Arnold phase coming up with Pluto coming back into Aquarius to actually make its full ingress. So there's going to be a backstabber. And that's what I'm paying attention to. And then if you want to do the Camelot thing, what is the potential? I'll be Merlin for a second, or maybe RFK right now is the Merlin to Trump to warn. There's going to be somebody that's close, and that's where Robert Phoenix and I got into the Jared Kushner talk last night, because it said that he's going to help the transition team and pick all the people on his executive team. And what's even weirder is like he's been using Ivanka, his daughter, as a pawn piece. Like, you want your daughter back? Because he just pulled her away for 4 years. She disappeared. Yeah. And so the Mordred, in my opinion, would be your son, right? Like, not like, okay, it's not like his incest son, right? But it's like, makes more sense that the Mordred would be the Jared Kushner in this moment.
Wow, interesting. When I saw the picture of Mordred first, when we looked at it, I thought, it looks a little bit like Loki, but he doesn't have the trickster energy. It sounds like he's more of just a betrayer. No,
he does have a little trickster, but it's more Plutonian deceptive and waiting for the right moment to strike, exposing a secret that he knows is going to hurt your heart, and then using it against you in a weak moment to take you out. Like the death of Arthur, this picture is pretty dramatic, but I like good ones.
That is dramatic.
Right, the death of Arthur. And it's like the sorrow that Arthur goes through. Like, it's not so much about the death and the betrayal of the heart is what gets him, but it's because his heart was so not paying attention and actually knew, but didn't want to know, but also cared more about the sword than, and that's what's weird about the Three of Swords, right? Heartbreak is Excalibur. That's why the author says, might isn't right, right is right. Because the might of the sword to pull it out of the stone, you'd think is you're the great one because now you're the king who's got it. It's not. It's what takes you down and you fall. So
that's really interesting, because there's a film from World War II that was made in England called King Arthur Was a Gentleman.
I know, I've seen that one. It's it's not that great.
It's not that great. It's kind of
it's World War II production.
It is in British World War II.
Yes, and it's
Hollywood.
like not funny-ish.
But there's a part where
it's really weird.
Where the sword, like he has to go get the sword,
yeah.
and it's like too big, and the sword is always the problem, trying to wield the sword. And I don't remember. It's like he kind of accidentally hits a Nazi or something and wins at the end.
Right.
But it's not. It's really because he's trying to be valiant and stand
Right.
up for the nation. And it's not, and it is the story about him kind of having to get over his ego, right?
Yeah.
But King Arthur was the name of a battleship during World War II, also for Britain. And
Did it get sunk by
something
the
else.
Germans?
I don't know.
Probably.
But it,
I wouldn't be
it comes
surprised.
up. Let me see.
Because
I think it's still there
the
today.
HMS Arthur, is that what they called it?
I thought it was the King Arthur. What do you call them?
HMS.
Okay. HMS Royal Arthur.
Royal Arthur. I'm pretty good. I was in the Navy. I should know these things.
It was commissioned as a training establishment. Oh, wait, that's it's the first Royal Arthur Stone frigate.
Okay, let's go see if it got
1939.
sunk.
I don't even know how to read all this stuff.
The last recruits arrived. 49, it made it through the war.
Decommissioned
It got
1946.
decommissioned. No, it didn't have a
Made
good
it
death. It
till-
didn't have a good death. Got put in a port, decommissioned and stripped.
Name transferred to Camp Kingsmore in 1950.
It was vandalized. There's nothing worse than a decommissioned ship.
Well, why don't they even show it?
Every captain dreams, if you're in the Navy, of any Navy, a great war where the ship kills most of the people, but you die at the last moment, and the ship, you go down with the ship, if you're a true captain. That's why in Titanic they show the captain going
Yes.
down, but like because that's weak ass shit.
Oh, they had another
Commercial
one earlier.
But like if you're a real hardcore motherfucker, you are a battle hardship like the Bismarck. The Nazis had the best ship, the Bismarck. It was the unsinkable ship. It did sink, of course, because the British surrounded it, but they shot a torpedo at its rudder. It's always the weakest link. But anyway, like you, if I was on the Royal Arthur, I'd be upset. Like I was on the Constellation, which makes sense with my,
That is perfect for you.
right? That was what I was attached to with my squadron, and that got decommed right when I got out, like 2004, it got decommed, and the Kitty Hawk was with it built. That was the twin brother of it, sister technically, but those two are decommissioned now. We didn't have a glorious end. We had a glorious decommission.
I was trying to see what happened to, the poor previous Royal Arthur was sold for breaking up August 1921. So that was an earlier one.
See, that's the dangerous part of trying to replay Camelot in every way. Name your kid it after it, he dies. Right? So they could be playing with fire. Right?
But then, what's interesting, have they even said it's Camelot? They haven't themselves.
No, but I
referred to
think
it.
that's what we're alluding to is that if RFK's saying a line all the time from the author of the modern version of Camelot,
Yeah.
and he does come from Camelot, and I'm sure that's how he sold his wife on it. This is the only way we can make Camelot happen again, honey. I know you're a Democrat, but we got to do this. Let him be King Arthur. We know that the story sucks for King Arthur. Anybody who thinks King Arthur is a good story has not read any of those stories. It is not a good. It always ends the worst for him. Everybody else, it's fine.
Okay.
But to have the sword and the stone is not. That's where tarot takes it. You always see the sword, 3 of swords through stone. The heart of stone.
Well, which
It's
is
not a good
necessary, I guess.
place. Or people like Ace of Swords so much and all that shit. Like, I always think of the sword as Excalibur. I'm like, I don't know if I want that. Swords are the hardest in tarot too. So you connect with like the cups. You see the Holy Grail is super part of the story, right? Like without the Holy Grail story is from Camelot too. That's what's an interesting part of it all. Mm-hmm. That's the cups. Like the embodiment of all of Camelot is the understanding of like the magician of all the tarot in one. But the fool is the one that believes that have to go through it, I guess, till the world card and realize that the whole world can't be Camelot.
But that's the thing. Maybe that's what we're realizing from the story, is that Camelot is never going to exist as you imagine it to. There's never going to be a perfect Camelot.
No.
There's never going to be a perfect, idyllic King Arthur who's going to come and help you. The true story is what do the knights do? What do you do when you're commissioned with upholding ideals or values or coming to the rescue? Or how are you going to actually operate in your life? That's the story, or that's the true royal part of the story, I guess, is how are the individuals participating going to act? It's never going to be King Arthur being the perfect king coming to save you, and the knights are never actually even going to be perfect. Right?
Well, and it's because of the self-destruction, not the dictator part of it, which is interesting. It's the self-destruction of his own happiness and love and betrayal that really he was betraying himself too. Mm-hmm. But it's also the dangerous grounds of Camelot is it does become the safe space that everybody loves, that they idolize, that they remember. It becomes I remember it was so great, but it lasts only a short period of time.
And people
not meant, there's no, and that also is like where the spiritual community believes in this kind of like new earth, that every part of earth is going to feel like this one energy that will feel that way, which it's not. Mm-hmm. That's the other lesson I learned through my time in Camelot, was that Merlin was teaching, or when they get to the Atlantis falls apart too. If you try to make the whole world one, it fails.
So you're trying to make it to be one, however it's one for you, however it's one for me, right? From our perspective, it's not some monarch, some dictator, some fictional king, or not mythical past king. It's just, what are those stories going to motivate you to do? I mean, that's why those stories are told, right?
I mean, if you think of like England and France and their battles throughout all the last, 1,000+ years, we can go back to Norman times. What makes it great is the differences in the terrain, that one's on an island, one's on the mainland. The castles have a different look. Even the way that the kings and the queens and their courts and their different personalities and their different vibes of doing things. That's what makes life so great. If everything's the same, so if you're just going to be like, oh, this is a light worker, the new earth, and everything's the same, don't put me in that, because it's going to be all the same. It's going to be like a VR program where every room is the same and every door is the same, or a corporate office where every room's the same and there's no cool stuff. Like, it's just all white walls and just,
yeah.
That's what you learn in Camelot, is like, that's why everybody's leaving for a quest. There's nothing better than a quest out of Camelot. Right? Because it's all the same. You learn that too. Even though it's like the cool place, it's home, but it's where you deal with your deepest shadows. The brighter the light, the darker the shadow. Mm. Right? The problem with the Joe Biden's America was we were watching people deal with their shadows, but there wasn't a lot of shadows because we were in a shadow. So when we look for the light, the shadows in ourselves become bigger.
Mm. So do we all need a sense of Camelot then? Do we all need to have a place we imagine as the light, perfect place, even if it's not?
No, because I feel like the more you do that, when you get it, it's only temporary. And it's because then whenever we get to the best place that we always say in our life, it's always the moment that it already is ended and it's already moving into the opposite direction. The second we're like, this is exactly where I've always wanted to be in my life. It's perfect. Everything's the way I want it to be. Is the second everything goes wrong. That means you've already reached it. That's how fast the solstice comes, right? It's like the longest day of the year. Fuck yeah, wait. Every day's losing sun. Till you're now, right now, we're dead in the middle of fall. Like, so, and it comes by and it goes by so fast. So it's not about a place, a moment, and a time. That's where the spiritual community is lost with this idea of this new earth. It's about the uniqueness of a new earth and what you contribute and how we all do it together, which is a possible way that Camelot can come together or any of these things can come together. But if it's just about, no, we're in control, we're in this space, and it all needs to look the same. Like what makes America great is Amish people that voted for Trump, or, you know, people that were for women's rights that voted for Kamala in a different part of the country, like, or in the same, they were in the voting booth right next to each other. That's what makes it, we're already in that promised land, if that makes sense. So it just almost got taken away. That was what was crazy, is that, you know, we're kind of already in it. So maybe it's the realization that we're in it.
Yeah, we're always in it.
We're always in it. That maybe it was set up, and the markers of the warning signs of Camelot falling are kind of what JFK threw out there with the assassination attempt and the way that the warmongering and all those kind of things, those are the things that kind of, the Mordred situations that kind of come in. Like Johnson, obviously, Lyndon B. Johnson was Mordred. You know, Pence was Mordred. Kamala was Mordred to Joe Biden. Right? Like the Mordred is very clear to see, the one that you go, are you really that backstabbing, betraying weirdo, you know, that's waiting to find something to crush me? So like, she knew about his age. She let him fall on his own sword with the age. Tried to say, no, he's perfect. Right? Pence could have done something and chose not to. And then I'll use it in testimony against him and I won't run with them again. Right? Didn't work. Right now, I actually thought last night, I'm like, the one person on earth that I think is the most like crawling into a hole and wanting to die is Mike Pence.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything.
No, and nobody's because nobody's thinking about him, but at the same time, he made the wrong choices.
Yeah.
You know?
You know what I was thinking about, since we are in the same astrology more as King Henry VIII. I don't know if you've seen the previews for Wolf Hall. Have you seen?
No.
Or there's a series about Henry, and it's really all about what's happening after the Reformation, during the time of the divorce and after, and how people try to lobby for control, and how Henry tries to keep control over all of those things. So when you take out the power structure, like the Roman Catholic Church, and try to establish something new, it's showing how he's trying to establish himself at the center and deal with all of those things he can't predict, and all of the ways people are going to try to take advantage of the situation. The way Henry VIII dealt with it was, what you can't call it micromanaging, over managing, was always being on top of everybody's move and trying to know everything and control it all.
That would be, in psychological terms, hypervigilant.
He was the epitome. Probably if you open up the dictionary, hypervigilant, it would be him.
That's right? What hypervigilance is, yeah.
And so he dealt with it in a way that probably made his life miserable, right? To constantly be worrying, is my wife cheating on me? Is someone trying to poison me? Is this guy trying to go work with the Pope? Is like really hyper.
You know what it gets intense. Deeper about, though, is it goes into, that's the result after I know every move they make, they just made a move that feels a little different. So it's the weeks, months, years of, what are you doing? Without saying anything. Observing so much, I know, I can feel you're a little different emotionally. No. And to where it becomes, you're doing this, but it's not. Right. So when you look at attachment styles, they talk about that hyper vigilance a lot, right? Like there's some people that are just like, what are you doing? And it's not a negative thing. It's just, there's some people that, but they're not paying attention to themselves enough, right? Like, you know, like if you're always paying attention to a friend your boss, your partner, or anybody too much, and all their moves that they're making, well, you're going to make an incorrect assumption of the move they're making, because people operate at different frequencies and different times, and especially if you use astrology, different transits and different emotions and situations happening, and you can't compute all their feelings, and you can be empathetic, but you can't be living in their full self. So like that'd be a hard way to live.
Yeah, it would be. I think that Henry VIII obviously managed to do it because he got out of his reign and there was still the new church existed, and the changes outlasted him, right? But very few people can live like that. And I think that's the part that it's like Mordred. You can become your own Mordred. If you're going to obsess about, I've got to know what everyone is doing and be on top of it all so we can get to this ideal of what is Camelot, which I think is more the Hitler method, right? With his Libra rising, probably, and Taurus sun, probably wanting to get to something beautiful and perfect that meets his ideal of perfection.
Right.
And I think for leaders, obviously the rulership style that is probably more manageable would be to figure out, who am I going to get that I can trust, that can help me with these things,
right?
But then to be able to let go enough to allow them to work, and be looking out for, is there a Mordred amongst these people? But the work has to be about achieving the Camelot that will emerge, right? The Camelot will emerge when you get the right people together to work together, and you respond in the moment. But it's not that you're going towards this fictional ideal, which is through history. That's what we see so many times, I think, in these cycles that we're looking at. For example, like the English Civil War, right? You have this ideal, we're going to have this ideal Puritan republic where these things happen. Then it happens, it gets there, and it falls apart because it has to be too oppressive to keep it that way, or something always falls apart. So I think the trick, especially for the United States, with the way that we've been set up and the way the founders worried about how are we going to be able to keep a democracy, right? That whole Benjamin Franklin quote, it's a great system if you can keep it, right?
Right.
That what can always overcome us is maintaining the balance of power. I'm such a Libra. I'm sorry.
No,
that
I
always
like
comes
that
to
because
balance for me.
Because, like, if you take the Arthurian story, Arthur's father, Uther, in the story, right? There was the movie that was just done like 9 years ago that was amazing, that really did a good job of showing it. But it takes from the old stories of that Uther, like, dies and pushes Arthur in a boat, and he ends up going into just the normal town in Britain, and has to get raised in a brothel, and the women in the brothel raise Arthur until he comes back to find the sword and the stone. So if you take the Disney version, right, you remember he's living with his uncle, not his father, right? And so he's trying to be a squire, right, in that story. That's a Disney version, so they're not going to put him in a brothel.
Right.
The original was that he was raised by the prostitutes in the brothel, and that's where he learned to scrap fight and do all those things and become a gambler. And then he was a gambler, and then he was a pimp in those times, which back then that would have been not frowned upon, right? And then the sword and the stone was like a thing, and then they start looking because there's word that he's alive, and so they start rounding up men to go try to pull the sword out because, oh, we want to find him and just kill him right away, so we don't have to deal with that, right? Mm-hmm. That's kind of a weird thing, because then Lancelot's pulled from Lady Lake takes Lancelot at birth, brings him to Camelot, and he has to learn survival skills and to be this great knight without his family. So they're both kind of dropped off in a place to find an ultimate fighting survival place. Mm-hmm. And so that story also teaches that the way you get to your highest spiritual place, which Merlin had to do too, really Merlin and Lady of the Lake they're old lovers that have made it past beyond the realms. But you have to be a survivor, and you have to go into the harshest places. So you notice in spiritual circles and people, they go through their dark nights of the soul, whether it was young or old or whatever age, they go through it. They have the most power with their energy and magic because they've been through the shadow.
Mm-hmm. It's very much the alchemical story, isn't it? It's about tempering not the sword, but tempering your soul, right?
Yeah, and I would say that you can't temper your soul until that soul's not been tempered. Meaning, like, I like RFK because he had to overcome his addictions, and he went into those realms. Yeah. I trust Trump more because he's been through weird shit and been through divorces and been through like his issues, right? Like, it's like, that's the weird part of this, the narrative in the world today, is they want you to be perfect. Yet it was weird in the Kamala world. They're like advocating for you to kind of go into that, which might be part of the universal way it's happening. There always has to be somebody pushing you into the shadow, and then somebody representing, like, I've been through the shadow and this is what it looks like on the other side. And there's always that negative placement, or that dualistic, like, weird, oppositional place of like, well, I want to go through the shadow. I don't want to be like you, but I'm going to end up being like you anyway. Mm-hmm. So everybody's going to end up being like a Donald Trump one day. They just haven't faced that shadow yet. We all want to be successful or reach something good and be a good father and a family member and learn our lessons in love and learn from our mistakes, whether we hire many people or whether we have bad jobs or whatever. We all want, like, it's not about making him the icon. I'm just using him as the example in this Venn diagram I'm doing, right? It's like that middle spot, though, is where people sit and wait between both. And that's, unfortunately, most of the electorate. They're not really ready to go fully on either side. So they want to be at Disneyland and go on the Brat ride or go on the Trump ride. They don't want to actually step into the spiritual lesson of people who are on Kamala's side to actually really go through Brat the way that it was supposed to, because all those Gen Zers that are trying to do it, it's more about the Instagram picture and the talk, but to actually perform the acts they want them to do, they're not doing. Right?
And you can't.
And
you can't skip that step.
Correct.
Right. And the other thing is that you can't push people into the abyss either. You can't decide, oh, we've got all these people sitting here in the middle of the Venn diagram. We got to push them off so that whatever, because you're pushing people to try to make them have a shadow moment to improve, and then decide, oh wait, you're my savior, you're the one who helped me, right? There's a bunch of people trying to force people to come to this artificial realization that they want to be like that person's group. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's something that you have to do. It has to come from within you and from an authentic experience or whatever. And it can be anything. It could be that you're sitting in having a difficult time on your Instagram and something happens and you become transformed. And it could all happen on social media, I guess, right?
Yeah, I mean.
But it's something you need to experience.
Yes. So to bring it to Arthur, we showed the picture, right? He's sitting like with his army, but he never left. He never went on a quest. So there was this decorum of all the 12 Knights of the Round Table. And it's not like a hyper-vigilant issue like Henry had, right? It's not like Arthur was like checking on you 24/7. Mm-hmm. There is this like brotherhood and for the light, and that, you are the best that you can be. But there's also a competitive aspect too, right? But what's funny is Arthur wasn't that way. So and Arthur reminds me that the King Arthur story is a reminder of the person in the middle of that Venn diagram. Like, won't go fully into the shadow, won't own that the shadow's there. So the idea of Camelot, that there was no problems, yet it was a place echoing with problems. Mm-hmm. And so when I looked at the election, it was like, this is like on my deepest spiritual level. It's like You have Trump and all the people, RFK, all these people on one side who are like owning, okay, yeah, I've got these shadows. While you're having the side that's telling you to go into the shadow, say that they're the shadow. Yet you go down the Brat Road, you know, now you're in a room with Tim Waltz and a kid, and what the hell's going on? And Glover Cleveland. Right? Like, what the heck? And you're telling me they're the ones that are the shadow, right? Like, that's what's weird is go and call her daddy, listen to call her daddy, and right? Like, go do all this shadow stuff, but we're not doing any shadow work here. They're the ones with a dark, bad shadow. So you always see that that's what the story teaches. This is also some really crazy Merlin teaching. That the shadow is not afraid to own it and is not promoting that it's a shadow, right? That the other side's a shadow without you owning the shadow, right? Like it's more of what's trying to cause disharmony and also pinning work that's not happening in the now, that was in the past, that has been stuff that has been worked through and has become to where you actually were able to get to that place. Stuff that falls off quick, shows up, doesn't do the work, and projects, you're the bad and I'm the perfect and I'm the good, and falls quick. So
I think that in this whole equation, there are also people, though, who are born to be the knights on that in that table, right? We are all knights, like we all.
That's the 12 zodiac signs.
Can do that.
It's the 12 zodiac signs.
Right, but within that, and we all have our role that we're born into. But I do believe that there are people who are born who rise into those positions of being like the one who was able to pull the sword out of the stone, because they're the people who have something about them that make them be people who will serve as models or role models for others, that will inspire or inspire them into action, whether it's to follow them into a battle or to run away. You know, it's going to be something that people need to spur them into action. Do you know what I mean? I do think there are people whose destiny right now, or whose life path right now, is to be, to step into the role of being a chosen one, or I don't know how else to say it. Do you know what? Do you agree with that or not?
Yeah, but I would say that the King Arthur story and the sword is when he pulls Excalibur, he acts as the sun. Mm-hmm. The 12 knights are when Arthur's aligned with Lancelot as number one knight, that's Leo, because he never experiences the love. Lancelot's the one who's actually making love to his wife and is the greatest knight and the one that has the greatest courage and will go on any quest, right? That's courage, that's Leo. So the other knights are the other signs. So if you replace Arthur with planets, wherever you're at in your journey, if let's say it's Saturn, Mordred, and it's in the knight's house, you're playing that knight with Saturn. So if Mordred's in the house of like Pisces right now, the confused knight who's dreamy but really sensitive and is ready for the tap out to go to a Kamala Harris Zoom call, right? That Mordred's not going to show up the way you want to, and you're going to have to face your issues with like, why are you so connected to always being on Zoom? Why can't you just go and talk to people in person? Mm-hmm. Or are you really going to do what somebody in a Zoom told you to do, like cut off your genitals right now? Mordred, right? You might need those genitals when you get over to Aries. Astrology is spoken through all story. Mm-hmm. That one that you find in yourself is when you're ready to start to see your life and see how all the pieces are all playing through these lenses and understanding this part of my life is stuck here, evolving, instead of saying stuck, is evolving here for this 3 years. and I'm working on this night. If you want to use this whole different way to look at it, I'm working on this night and it's this planet, so it's this part of myself. It's not Arthur, if it's Mars, right? It's like, okay, Mars is going to retrograde between these nights. It hasn't been here for, since 15 years in Leo, but I'm out one back in Cancer, and it's going to be in both, so that's weird. Now I'm going to be in both roles. I'm going to have to work on this for the next 7 months. I'm going to evolve through the way these characters play and accept it. That really Arthur's, whenever he has the sword of Excalibur, he's really a holographic sun projecting the light of what is the story of just the 12 nights. That's why his story is not much of a story. It's what comes in. It's like Jesus' story. There's a lot of the story missing. It's about his birth. It's about his 33 year that is this big year, the healer, the person that shows up to make and teach and give all this knowledge, right? And then is betrayed. It's all the same story, right? Sun in Scorpio, bitten, and then, and then dies on the cross for the sins. Arthur dies from betrayal with the sword, and Camelot dies, but it lives on through the rising in the Christ energy of Camelot as an idea, an ideal that we strive for.
Yeah. I think that's about it. You said it.
So,
I love that.
Will that actually happen? I don't know, but it's an interesting way to look at it. But it kind of is a telltale sign, I think, for people to really realize that those are the kind of talks that are happening behind the scenes, those are the quotes being brought out. It's not some cue thing. Mm-hmm. So, that was fun.
Yeah, I loved this one. I learned a lot, and now I want you to do a class on the nights.
I mean, that
astrology.
Hypergate, I covered it a little bit.
But it could be a whole thing.
I think it could help people understand, instead of looking at a 2D chart of like Mars and them seeing it right, in Leo right now, and it's going to retrograde, and like the way that works, like I've noticed that people have they read it analytically, and you can't read it analytically. Mm-hmm. You use the analytics naturally. There's an analytic spiritual brain. There's a spiritual mathematic brain. And that's not using an analytical side. It literally, that's why I'm like, they both have Saturn and Scorpio really quick. Like, right? Like there's no analytical, like, do I have to triple check? No, it's already a guarantee. So to make a prediction in your life, it's got to be a guarantee. That's why I'm like, it's guaranteed Kamala Harris will not win this election. And it's impossible. And I was laughing about it in my video for hours. I laughed. Anybody who thinks this is insane. And it's true, because it didn't happen. So I can say that because I know for sure that's where it might be playing I see it with all those kind of energies, and that's just a sliver of what it is. There's so many of those. It's not a piece of paper and the little sign in the planet.
Right.
And then the analytical, what does the book say? That's not going to get you any. So hope that helps people kind of like reinvent however you want to look at it.
I hope so too.
Yeah, I mean, most people don't associate with nights, but make them whatever you want, or think about whatever story the sun's traveling through. But there's always a character that's the sun.
Grover Cleveland could have been the sun.
Yeah. Well, he was the sun, purebred Pisces, with a young girlfriend he was looking over and playing a Democrat pedophile playbook. So really interesting, but also not surprising, and a late degree. And what's really weird about people who are dead in their charts is Neptune stationed right where his sun is, 27 degrees Pisces. And so, of course, that would have been another thing I could have said as a mundane astrologer doing this election, and said, well, the last time we had a president that came in with this, they actually was Grover Cleveland, and Neptune happens to be stationed right on his sun right now.
It's crazy.
Right? Like it's that quick. and easy. Or the week of was the buildup of Mars sextiling or trining his sun, the grand trine with Mercury, trine his sun. So Grover Cleveland was probably being talked about a lot and thought about like, well, if Trump wins next week, he'd be like Grover Cleveland. You know, that's what media is thinking about. That's what other people, it's subconsciously all there. And the whole time somebody could have just gone to the astrology chart and went, oh, the grand trine that we just had in water with Mercury, Mars, and Neptune was all on Grover Cleveland's sun, and Neptune stationing on his sun. And it stations direct here soon. And Saturn is in Pisces over his Mercury and his Uranus conjunction and his Venus, which I already remember right now. And then he has his Saturn in Scorpio trine all that stuff. And we are in Scorpio season, and Saturn in Scorpio is exactly where the election happened, on his Saturn in the teens right there, 13, 14 probably from what I saw.
Wow.
So Grover Cleveland's chart just played out astrologically as a soul, and it was embodied.
That is fascinating.
But you know, you won't learn that in Hellenistic astrology talks.
Well, you'll learn something else.
You learn, yeah, I know. You won't get close to that. But yeah, so all right, well, what a time. You'll see us on the next one, and let us know ideas of whatever you all want us to do. I mean,
Yeah.
we have so many things we come up with, but it'd be fun to do a fan topic,
Yeah, I think that would be wonderful.
right? Something that you all want us to do. Let your ideas in the comments below, and we'll take a look on High Viber on YouTube. So
Great.
with that, History in the Stars, we are out. Goodbye.